Alright, good evening. I'll make a motion. I will officially open the meeting. It is about 5 past here on Thursday, January 14th, lower level of Town Hall. Special meeting for Strawberry Fields. If you could please just stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alright, so let's get started. Peter Williams is on his way. He's running a bit late. He's asked me to hold off that for his portion until he gets here. Are you guys prepared to discuss the traffic study first, or you want to go?
Actually, we're waiting on Bill Scully right now, so, we can open, I don't know how much longer Peter's going to be.
About 10 minutes, I think.
Well, he did share with me that because everything just came to him yesterday, he hasn't had a chance to review anything that was submitted, but maybe at least you could present what you submitted and.
Yeah, so I can give a recap as to what happened between when we last met and today.
Sure.
So again, everyone, Christopher Agostino, counsel for the applicant, Strawberry Fields Estates. As you may recall, at the last hearing in December 17th, we were short one voting member, so we opted to continue the hearing and not hear any substantive testimony regarding the continued evolution of the plans, to avoid any potential technical defect with any member's vote.
Right.
So I'm glad everyone's here this evening, everyone's feeling healthy. I know I was actually stricken by probably the same thing you had. It was
awful.
bad. There was definitely something going around, so I was seen cross-eyed that night. But we made it there. In any event, we had continued that hearing to tonight, but back in December we were prepared to discuss the continued evolution of the plan, the most recent iteration having been submitted before the November 14th hearing. And at that hearing in November, it was the first iteration of the plan that included substantial engineering detail. If you recall, the design had changed in the fall, where we went in the direction of pursuing a combination of cottages, townhomes, and single-family homes rather than all single-family homes. And we had initially floated what was a concept plan that was void of any real engineering detail. So once we committed to go forward with this iteration of the plan, the next step was to put engineering detail into it, and we had done that in a submission 2 weeks prior to the December 17th hearing. And the goal of that technical submission was to receive feedback from the town's engineer on the detail that was submitted in that proposal. So we were prepared on December 17th to hear the board's peer review engineer and the board's traffic peer review engineer describe their response to what was the first technical submission. And the board's peer review engineer for civil engineering, Mr. Williams, submitted a letter dated December 10th, and it was that letter that we had planned to discuss at the hearing on December 17th. And what we had done between the November hearing and the December hearing was, at the November hearing, Mr. Williams had looked at the plan and had identified certain areas where he wanted to see more detail in terms of drainage. And on the traffic engineering side of it, Mr. Faisal, is that his first name?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Faisal, his first name is Faisal.
Yes.
That's right, sorry. So, what's his last name?
Husseini?
Husseini. So Mr. Husseini had requested additional detail on some of the site triangles that are applicable to the entrance. So we did submit additional information on both of those issues, and we're prepared to discuss that in December. And now I think what we're hoping to do tonight is essentially have that technical peer review. But what had happened was, since we had a 1-month interim period between the December meeting and tonight, we took advantage of that and submitted additional information just recently that further updates some of the technical information to try to address what we had assumed Mr. Williams was going to report to the board on December 17th. So
And also, Mr. Williams and I and Bessel and Bill took the advantage of the last meeting to discuss some of the technical issues.
Right, so
Yeah,
since
kinda
we
work
had all
some
the
of those out,
engineers
so.
here, we figured the engineers could meet face to face and just continue to work out technical engineering issues. So I think tonight is really going to focus on any remaining technical concerns that we see at a preliminary standpoint for this plan, and see if we can get to the point where we've crossed off and ruled out anything that could be identified as an engineering deficiency, a critical design defect that might prevent this board from ruling on the plan. And I think, after we go through some of that technical data tonight and hear from Mr. Williams, at that point, I think we're probably getting to the point where 2 weeks before the next hearing, we can submit what is hopefully the last iteration of our best effort, our best foot forward for this design. And then from there on out, it's up to the board to then deliberate. So I think as far as timeline, we'd probably be looking for the board to start deliberating and considering the plan before the board at the next hearing. So if tonight there's anything remaining that the board feels as though has been unaddressed or that might be an open question, that's what we'd wanna get out tonight. Because I think, having gone through a couple peer reviews of this technical design, from a preliminary standpoint, it's our position that as far as stormwater management, and as far as safety issues associated with site distance at the entrance, we've really addressed those concerns. And I think it's then, on the board to decide whether or not, they're prepared to move forward. And, as I've always stated, the 40B process contemplates preliminary plans at this stage. But no matter what, we still have to go through the final permitting process and come back with final plans if a comprehensive permit does issue based on these preliminary plans. So there may be issues that Mr. Williams is going to wanna see quote-unquote additional detail or additional information on, but I think the idea is that they would be conditions that would call for that information to be included in the final permit set that's then submitted to this board at a later date. I know Mr. Williams is looking over what was submitted, I think, a couple days ago, was it?
Yesterday, actually.
Yesterday,
I was-
but I don't know how much time he wants to spend on that, cause we really were essentially looking for the substance of the December 17th hearing, which is what we were planning to present and discuss today, and to the extent any additional data is available, we can get into that, but at this point, I think it's the board's peer review engineer that has to present. The only other lingering issue or submission that came out of the November hearing were a couple new plan sets that showed some detail on the cottage units, and I believe the board has that, so if there are any questions on the design there, we can talk about that tonight as well. But otherwise, if the board has any questions, I know Mr. Williams is still looking at the plan set that was submitted. If the board has any questions or things that they wanna highlight for discussion later tonight, maybe we could talk about that now, and then Mr. Williams could present when he's able.
I don't have anything yet as far as, for plan, regarding the new plans that came in. Do you want to give us, a summary of what you guys discussed that night?
I have some things, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you do? Okay, sure. Okay, I agree.
I have a couple questions in regards to the letter that was sent in today from, I believe you, Chris, it was sent into the department over here in regards to the changes that's going over to mass housing.
Sure,
I believe, I just had wanted to clarify a few
Yep.
things that I saw that were a little questioning to me. So we sent in the changes to the mass housing in regards to the cottages and the townhouses in accordance to the original permit that we sent in. That particular thing, at the very last couple of line items, I thought it said significant change. Alright, so is that at the significant change at their point of view, or is it a significant change that you're looking at for the,
Yeah.
you wanna explain a little
Sure,
bit on that,
sure.
so I can have everybody
Yep.
understand what that means?
I can put that in context. So,
Okay.
One of the requirements in order to be eligible to receive a comprehensive permit is that your project must be eligible to receive subsidized financing. It must be eligible for a subsidy. And the way that's determined under the regulations is what's called a project eligibility letter. And that is a technical prerequisite to participate in the 40B process. Before we come before this board, and before this board issues a comprehensive permit, you have to check off that we are a limited dividend entity, which we agree to be, that the project is eligible for that subsidy, and that the developer is committed to maintain a certain percentage, 25% of the housing as affordable. So if we satisfy the project eligibility requirements, that's determined in that letter that Mass Housing issued. We started the process with a letter for 92 units of eligibility, and that got us in the front door. Now, technically, that's all we need, but we want to dot the i's and cross the t's, and we actually had a plan for 94 units, so we sent a letter to Mass Housing saying, we know you issued the project eligibility for 92 units, can you confirm that we're eligible for 94 units, okay? And they said, what they traditionally say is, we review it at the beginning of the process, and then we review your plans on final approval. And they'll say, your project continues to be eligible under the initial approval. So that's what happened when we submitted for the 94. Now that we've changed again to 116 units, okay, we wanted to again confirm that we remain eligible. So there's actually a regulation that says where the developer changes elements of the project that may affect project eligibility, the developer is required to notify Mass Housing, notify the Board of Selectmen, notify the Zoning Board, and notify the Department of Housing and Community Development. And Mass Housing has 15 days to confirm whether or not the project, whether or not it's a substantial change from project eligibility, from a project eligibility perspective.
When was that sent in?
I sent it in on like Tuesday.
All right, so we got a couple of weeks before we hear anything back from them.
Yes, and I'll tell you what you will hear. You'll either hear one of two things, that they think it's a substantial change for whatever reason. I don't think it is. If we had gone from for sale to rental, that changes the whole subsidy program, and that changes whether or not it's a subsidized project under the subsidy program that they had looked at, which is likely the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. But all we did was, we increased the number of units from 94 to 116, which under the project eligibility requirements is not one of the things that constitutes a substantial change from a project eligibility perspective.
But we changed the type of homes. We went from single-family homes to cottages to townhouses.
Right.
Those are where the wording is changed on your subsidized permit, is what you're stating, that you sent into Mass Housing?
Yeah, I notified them of that, but the only thing they're looking at is a change with respect to the project eligibility requirements. And the project eligibility requirements being limited dividend organization, the other one's actually site control, and the last one being project eligibility, and changing the style or typology of the houses likely does not affect project eligibility. Distinguish that from a project change after the board issues a permit, that's a different analysis. Like if you issued a permit for all single-family houses and we came back and started showing you townhouses, then that would be something that you'd have to reopen the public hearing. But all we're talking about right now is whether or not we're still eligible to even participate in the comprehensive permit process. So I think they're gonna say this is not a substantial change from a project eligibility perspective. If they do, what they will do and what they consistently do is they will confirm that your existing project eligibility letter remains in force, but we will defer any review until final approval, which is,
Come up with now.
whatever the board ultimately decides on.
All right, that was one question from before. Other question is, we were talking about at one time, like, the bus spots in the place. We have one bus stop throughout this whole project, which is located up, if I'm not mistaken, up by the single-family homes. So, we have that in one place, but we don't have anything, like, again, obviously, we understand that Somerset Ave, anybody that lives in Dayton, we know that 138 is a very dangerous road. We we talked about possibly doing a playground, you said that it was unfortunately the way the people's houses and the way they have to maintain and take care of it, it's a problem for the actual project. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm still not comfortable with children walking up 138 without any sign, a flasher, stop, caution, stop traffic to allow them to pass to go over here behind the town hall. I'd like to see something on here that's something for public playground for the children. I understand we talked about it, but you gotta understand where I'm looking at too. We're gonna be allowing, as we stated, so many children into the project out of this entire development. And they're gonna have to cross the road. That is a dangerous section in that area, we do know it. And I know that we talked with the traffic study and, trying to get it up to the 50-mile-an-hour class, which gives us a bigger angle for view, all the other stuff like that. But I still think if we could put some type of playground on this property somewhere, somehow, that's not changing your way of your layout of your homes, maybe taking a little bit of a spot over behind the townhouses, I'm not sure, how that works, the topo, but if there's something that we can do there, it would be, I think it'd be much more helpful for me to let this keep going the way it is without any kind of place for children to play, because I know there's gonna be kids here. Not gonna be a ton of kids, there's gonna be kids. And as we talked about earlier, the cottages start off at a lower income. Children, people start and then they have a child, they go to the condos, and they go to the condos, they go to the single family homes or vice versa. Wealthier folks go right to the single family homes, no place, they have yachts. These other ones don't, especially the townhouses.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add something? I had a question that it kind of goes with yours. So I noticed on 138, when you're going north, it's divided, it's a passing. Going south, it's solid. I know it's not up to you guys, but is there something we can go to the DOT and,
They would make the decision.
Yeah,
and
'cause, I
agree
mean,
with you
that
on
in
that.
the- it would be
As a
right in
board,
the
we have to
section.
reach out to 'em.
it's right in the section between the two streets, where going north you can pass, and especially with children walking.
I think that would change with an inlet and an outlet coming on
Okay.
the road, I
Alright.
can't answer for them, but I think that would change.
So I heard two concepts. One was safety of reaching from the project site to behind town hall.
We're gonna
and-
get them answered in a few minutes.
Yes, yeah, so I'm gonna defer, Mr.
Yes.
Scully can talk about that, and, I don't know what the current flashing sign or crossing configuration is, but certainly that's
There
something,
isn't.
okay, so certainly
Yeah.
that's something that, we could discuss as to whether or not,
There is just a caution, just a sign, pedestrian crossing right directly across from here. That's it, but when you got children, I just rather avoid something that's gonna be inevitable down the road.
How far down is that new sidewalk supposed to go?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure on that. Probably get Tommy Ferry,
Yeah.
maybe he could get some answers for us at the next meeting on that.
Excuse me, what was,
The new sidewalk that they're putting in on 138.
there's one on Center Street.
No, there's gonna be a new
Yeah,
one
there's
on
a
138 as well. Was just on Facebook today.
Yeah, it's a state project that's starting
Right.
in Rainham
Coming
and
down.
going
Oh,
all the way
if
down.
it's a state project?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
going all the way down.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a new project.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
something
brand
that you
new.
might not see for a while, but it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think maybe defer on the crossing to, and you can give a presentation, on the sightlines and maybe include a discussion
You
on
guys just
that.
Try
think
to-
about
I'll
what
try
I
to
talked
answer a
about
couple of
with
your
the other
questions.
kids. Something possible,
Yeah.
Okay.
place
Yeah.
where kids can hang out.
Can you explain why there can't be a playground somewhere?
Well, again, I think the presentation that we gave to this board in Stonebridge's experience, okay, doing this in many different communities, projects like this, it's not something that's appealing to the homeowners and the operators of the project down the line. Now, it may seem like a good idea that, it's nice to have something like that, but as we've indicated, as far as, an active or a full playground with swings and those types of things,
I agree with what you're stating when you have homes, but when we have like a townhouse where these children might be living, they have no yard, they have a deck, we cleared that up, they have a deck and a garage, they don't actually have any yard. The houses that are out there, absolutely, the people can put a swing set, whatever they like on their property. the cottages are very small lots as well. And obviously, we're looking at the topo and all the stuff in here, there's a lot of wetland around it. But if we get into where the townhouses are, those children that are there, they're gonna come out in the yard, there's no place for them to go, they don't have a yard to play in. It's just strictly a big area where, whatever. So that's why I was thinking, in that particular area, not saying to make the whole development look like it's child-friendly for those out there, cause they're gonna have their own yards. Strictly where the townhouses are, if there's something in that area we can make a playground for.
So understanding, you know, our position, and I know you brought it up, I think before we leave tonight, maybe if we could get more feedback from other board members too, and because maybe they might agree that, yeah, you know, but we can take that and then we can give you an answer between, you know, now and the next hearing, we can come up with and say, this is our best proposal. And if you, and then the question becomes whether the board wants to say, you don't want it, but we're gonna impose it as a condition, put a playground there.
Well,
And then it's up to us to decide whether or not that's something we can live with, so.
no doubt, and again, I like the idea of the bus stops way over here, on this spot. Is there another spot for the bus stop? Is, how many feet from that bus stop to the cottages at least for the children to walk to?
So I know there's been additional discussion on the bus stop, and I think, we can
go over
discuss
in a
that.
little while.
Yep,
Just
we
run
can
some
discuss that
things
as well.
by us.
Yeah, and this
It's
is
on my
great that
mind.
we're discussing sort of these open questions.
And where the bus stops are, where the bus stop is there a continuous sidewalk from the bus stop going to the existing sidewalks? Or is that gonna have to walk out into blacktop? Just wanna make sure we have that answered out too.
Yep.
Other than that, I think I'm good for now.
I think I would, in terms of the playground component, I would say even potentially as a thought compromise or consideration, is I personally would love to see playground space there, or playground. I know the arguments that can be made for and against playgrounds and kids using, abusing, all kinds of, you know, ways you can look at it. I also agree with Greg that otherwise the kids, whether they're younger or older, if they're in a cottage environment space, really all they have is blacktop. So my question potentially is, since I'm assuming eventually, once this project is completed, it would become a homeowners association, am I right on that?
Actually, the townhouses would be cottages, and I believe the townhouses would be condominiums, as we discussed, and I
Right.
believe the cottages as well would also be managed as a condominium.
As
and
separate projects or separate associations?
Separate associations, yeah.
Okay, with common areas, certainly, obviously, and
Correct,
some
yes.
components would be common.
Correct.
Because what I'm getting at is I wonder if it's possible, if the playground side of it, using that term, represents issues including liability to the developer while the whole process is going through phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if it's potentially possible to create that in phase 1, at least if nothing else, is open space with benches. So if parents wanna take kids out in the field to play, or into a grassy area to play, you know, throw a ball around, play kickball, there's space to do it. Once you have the associations, plural, they can determine how that space is gonna be used because it's gonna have to be collectively maintained anyway.
So, in other project, communities that we've built, like, for example, in Stony Ridge.
Right.
It's really more of a burden on the community than help. I mean, you would know.
No, and that's why I'm trying to, I know what you're getting at, Fisher, and I agree in some respects. Having more there creates more of a problem.
Exactly,
And that's why I'm just
and-
wondering, even if you had open space,
Yeah, we can do that. I mean,
if there's a way to
it's
create
really,
that, that's
I
what-
just would like to state that it's really not a burden on us at all to do that.
Well, I'm just
It's,
looking
we're
at.
trying to save, the burden on the homeowners, because, like, we have plenty of space, we can do something here, we can do something here, we have plenty of space to do it. But in, like, we have a community of 220 units of condominiums, like, exactly like these in Abington. And we did a miniature golf area, and we did tennis courts, actually. Well, guess what? Nobody's using it, and it's a burden on it, and they closed it up, they locked it up, because it's a burden of, a fee, an additional fee on the community to take care of, and nobody was using it.
I just don't wanna, I kinda
But
wanna stop
I mean,
the
I'm
children
happy to do
from
anything,
leaving their development, walking or riding a bike up 2 hills
I understand.
and 138 to cross a road where we have nothing for them to push to cross to use the town. when I really think if we have a little spot in this area, I'm not looking for miniature golf, I'm thinking something like a swing set, a merry-go-round, something that these children can hang out with, or a basketball court, something that they can play with, could turn into tennis, just,
Yeah.
it's
It's
not
really-
as much as the houses, cause I believe those people could be able, you got enough yard, put your own swing set up, kids can come play there
It's-
too.
It is, we'll leave it up to the board
I'm just
discussion
thinking
as
as
well,
one
but I'm
person.
telling you what's happened to us in different communities. To me, it's really very simple thing to do. I'm not trying to, to push away from it, but, the space is available and it's not really a big burden on us.
Okay.
It's just a burden on the community afterwards, and I'm telling you what will happen, like, let's take an example on, what's that subdivision across from Town Hall? Stonegate. They have a playground. Go there and see, nobody uses it,
Right.
and now it's a burden on somebody to upkeep it as a.
Well, that before me, but that was a 55 or older, right, a project division, I'm surprised it has a playground in there. Am I correct on that?
Are you talking about
Well,
the,
it started off as a 55 and older,
Oh,
but
you're
they
talking
came in,
about-
they changed
Oh,
it.
that
or are you talking about
That's when we put
the
the playground.
duplexes?
Okay.
Is that what you're talking, are you talking about the duplexes, or are you talking
No,
about?
I'm
No,
listening to what
Stonegate,
you
it's
said.
Stonegate,
a single
okay.
family. And it's, in my opinion, it's an eyesore and nobody's using it, but
Yeah, but they have yards there.
I understand,
They have
but,
their own yards, so
but
if they wanna put up a
very
swing
few
set, they
people
can.
here, very few people here have kids. People who have kids will not gravitate towards a condo living, they don't. But maybe the best thing to do is just like leave like passive recreation area.
This, yeah, actually, I was gonna
Let's-
suggest we should take a look, I do like Jonathan's idea, and I think we can explore it a little bit, is
Of
that
what?
leaving an open passive recreation area that has two functions. First, just a place that a couple people can go and like
Throw a
set up some
ball.
soccer nets and kick a ball
Well,
around.
that's really what I'm thinking,
And-
then,
and-
eventually the associations can decide collectively.
Exactly,
What they wanna
exactly.
do with it, it takes it off of
That's fine,
the town leader and
we're,
off of
we're,
you
we're
guys
good with that.
during construction.
In the place in Abington, you said where they decided to shut it down and lock it up, who was it that decided to close it up?
The homeowner,
The homeowner
the
association?
condominium association, the
Okay. Oh,
trustees.
This was years after we had left.
Yeah, no, I'm
right?
just
You know.
curious, so kind of we're saying here is that, like, I guess that could be something that we could, or the HOA could, I guess, decide at some point.
If we, especially if the land is set up so that they could do that with it at
Okay.
some point.
Okay, so yeah, we can definitely go back to that topic at the end, but now we have Peter Williams here, we'll go on to discussing, his comments. Peter, anything you wanna start with?
No, really.
Right,
Summertime.
yeah,
No, I've gone over it at the last, time we met at a meeting, I kinda went over to the engineer and we kinda did a long discussion on that because of mainly a lot of technical issues with the plans.
Is it the December
Yes.
tenth?
So I don't know.
With the public record, you wanna maybe identify the concerns that you have and what you were looking at, maybe some conversations you had.
make sure that they have some tailor the plans, to what some of your comments were, so I didn't know if you wanted to start off talking about those.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
It might be helpful if they just at least start addressing what they've addressed with these new plans. I don't know if you wanna discuss the new plans that came in, I haven't had a chance to look at them.
We can go back to what we were gonna speak about at the Greg Driscoll, Jacobs Driscoll hearing at the last meeting, which was when you had requested further detail on some of the drainage calculations for basically this area of the project. And we provided some preliminary drainage calculations, which gave general sizing for basins and everything throughout the project, including this area of concern. And then we also prepared what I call the secondary drainage calculations, which go into more detail of the drainage design for this area. Well, this area down here, this basin and this basin.
I'm sorry.
And then we sat down and discussed that, and basically we were heading in the right direction, I thought, and provided this latest plan. We moved this basin over a little bit, as you had pointed out, we were creating kind of a swell on this back property here, and we created this new swell here, and readjusted the grading for this little basin right here.
In my December 10th letter, identified a couple areas I felt that had potential impacts, those two abutting properties in that area by that detention basin. And we had just at the meeting I had with the engineer, we went over those issues and I explained to him what was going on. And so he hopefully has addressed that in the latest edition of the plans that were provided yesterday. Some of the other issues I had were with that they weren't gonna provide a full drainage analysis, a detailed analysis for the whole site. And I kinda indicated that the information I had received today didn't confirm that was gonna be warranted, that a more detailed analysis should be provided because it wasn't proving their case that the proposed design would address the potential increase in runoff and, mitigate any impacts from the development on adjacent properties in the wetlands. So, he said they were gonna look at that. I had an issue with one of the internal calculations within the HydroCAD calculations, and I had received by email some response to that today, which I haven't looked at either. So I think those are the big issues with regard to the drainage design. And I also noted that, I don't know if we discussed that, but the project was providing a no-touch buffer along the northern property line, but not on others, where the development was probably even closer to some of the properties and the houses, and if that could be investigated. On the houses along 138, there was no buffer provided there, but we're providing it to the north, where in a lot of cases, the houses are much closer to the development. And a number of these things I have in here, I asked to have the test pit information provided, which was not, and that the information, and I think we learned from the Board of Health's agent that that they weren't witness, so they're gonna require witness test pits. And some of the other things in there are more kind of design issues, just to confirm that the detention basins have required 1 foot of freeboard during a 100-year storm. They're close in some, and some were just, not quite adequate, and that's why I had some concerns with providing detailed counts for the whole site.
Anything you have in response to that, or no?
Right,
So, actually, taking a step back, I know, again, November 14th meeting, we discussed specific areas of concern. And we said we were going to do HydroCAD analysis of those areas of concern. Understanding that we felt as though, at this preliminary stage, HydroCAD for the entire project site was not called for from a preliminary design standpoint, with the understanding that there are wetlands on this site, so by definition, it must comply with the DEP's stormwater management regulations. The key for this board is, to the extent there are specific local concerns that are unique to Dayton and unique to this site and the neighbors, that those are the areas that this board is gonna ask us for additional detail on. In that sense, what we submitted for those specific areas of concern, can we hear a little more as to whether or not we've proven that those areas of concern are not going to be problematic, or have you had a chance to look at those in any more detail?
I haven't looked in more detail, I was waiting for the additional information, which only came yesterday and today, which I have not had a chance to look
Right,
at.
right.
So, and that's what come into with my comments on the freeboard and some smaller issues like that, that don't indicate that I can feel that the preliminary analysis confirms that the system will properly handle the flows. And so that was, I'm hoping to see in the latest calculations submitted.
Okay, and I think, you know, I think hopefully the latest calculations, at least with respect to those specific areas, should show that, again, there are no material discrepancies. I think, from our perspective, the goal is to point out, this is just not gonna work, or this is a serious problem here, and that's what we wanna drill down on. So, between now and the next hearing, and again, hopefully at the next hearing, we'll be able to identify one way or the other, whether or not there remain any serious design concerns from a drainage perspective. But keep in mind that, you know, ultimately the project has to comply, and we wouldn't propose something that isn't gonna comply, because that's a waste of our time. As far as the impact on wetlands, again, the Conservation Commission has, that's one of the few areas under 40B where there really is another bite at the apple, to make sure that those interests are protected.
When was the test pits done?
So I believe, I thought the test pit information was in the plans. Did we add those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the locations weren't shown on the plan, that was one of the issues.
Is that the case?
Not all of them,
Not all assessments.
no.
So generally, with respect to, I think from a preliminary perspective, with respect to the detention basins that are of critical concern, the ones being near adjacent properties, were we able to identify the test pit data for those pits?
Not
for-
all.
For those areas?
Not all of them.
Could you maybe identify to Greg which ones you were missing? Cause generally, you know, I thought we had done some preliminary testing in all
Yeah,
the
we have.
areas that were gonna be, infiltration of basins.
Yeah, well, there's that one new area here that we don't, we didn't have a basin on here before. We had a building there, and then the bus stop, and now we have that basin.
Okay.
And we don't have one there either.
But I think one of the things I wanna see and improve is that, you know, they had to provide a minimum of 2-foot separation from the 100-year season of water. I mean, and you couldn't confirm that, and I would assume that would, even a preliminary design could be, you got the basin bottom, and then you get the test pits, and you can confirm that, but I couldn't confirm that. So
Right.
that was one of my concerns.
So,
And it could be just that you needed to show all the test pits on the site. It was the case.
okay, and in some cases, we don't have test pits?
Yes.
Okay, so
I think we asked for some of the distances too, test pits.
the distances from the test pits to the basins?
Yes.
So there has to be that separation. The 2-foot separation has to be maintained in order to,
It depends on the design. If I'm designing an infiltration basin, then yes. If I'm designing a wet basin, then no.
right, are any of these called for as wet basins?
They could be converted to wet basins if I need to.
Okay, so if we need to. I think what I'm getting at is, if it's an infiltration basin and we have to show 2 feet of separation, if it's so confined that we can't possibly grade it to accommodate a level of high groundwater, then I think that's the type of deficiency that we could make apparent at this point based on the size and the area that we have. Because the concern is, at this point, we're not gonna go out and do additional testing from a preliminary perspective. Cause we did have that design alteration where we move things around, and part of the reason we don't have test pit information in these locations is they weren't originally called for as stormwater management facilities. But where now we're showing them as stormwater management facilities, from a preliminary perspective, if there's enough area and space to do the grading, then we can show that, look, even if groundwater is close to the surface or high, we have enough room to bring in fill and add it to make sure there's 2 feet of separation. If groundwater's too high, ultimately, then we can show that we can redesign it to make it a wet basin. Is essentially what we're proposing at this point.
Okay,
from a
those
preliminary
types of
perspective.
details, I think, need to be specified to the board, because I'm sure that this board would probably have various conditions that it would impose depending on if this was a wet basin or an infiltration basin. And they'd wanna have some input from their engineer as to what types of things they need to be taking into consideration. And now you're talking about bringing fill into a pretty sensitive environmental area, so I think that if that's gonna be the answer, okay, then if we can't do it this way, we'll design it that way. Like, that's the type of detail, not just we'll take care of this in the final iteration of that. Because I would be shocked if this board didn't consider that to be a project change down the road, and that's not what this board wants to do, is deal with design project changes like to that extent down the road. I think they want to have a full understanding of what is your proposal, what's your contingency if it doesn't work, so that they know what it is they need to be thinking about when they're issuing their decisions, whatever conditions need to be there. Because this board could put a condition on this that says they all have to be infiltration basins, and that would be a problem for you, I would assume, if we're not, unless you're able to prove it through whatever test pit data is submitted. So, I mean, that's my only concern when I'm reading a little bit, and I haven't had an opportunity to read the responses fully either, and to fully understand what was submitted. I'm just a little concerned that everything is going to be responded to by saying, we'll take care of that as the final submission. I think that the town board has an ability to have their engineer, this is essentially his first round of comments to an engineering design. They have the ability to have that engineer provide you with some areas of concern. And from what I recall you saying from the very beginning of this application, you said you know the history of this site. And the last thing that anybody wants to do here is come into the board, ask for a permit, and have this not be buildable down the road. And that you were, I'm sure I have notes in here, that you were committing to proving a little bit more detail than you might typically do at this level, so that people could confirm and feel comfortable that, hey, when we get to the next boards that we need to meet, when we get to the state regs and everything else, that we're gonna have some sense of assurance that this isn't just, unfortunately, another proposal that can't happen on this site. Because this site has a very long history with a lot of different proposals being out there. So I hear you, Chris, I know where the law sits with all of this, but I also know that I don't think that there's a lot too much that's being asked for. At some point in time, it's gonna need to be provided. I have understood your client had already kind of committed to providing a little bit more than the bare minimums here. And so I would hope that between now and the next kind of public meeting, the engineers are able to have some discussions, and if it's going to be some type of a contingency, if we can't do it this way, we'll do it that way, that is specified, so this board is able to make a fully informed and decision, and they can make a decision if they want to insist that it be designed one way, which is an option that they obviously have, or come up with contingencies based on whichever design alternative is being decided.
Right. And I think as you described, the idea of contingencies and more knowledge about what exactly the realm of possibilities could be makes sense. I think my immediate concern was, we're not gonna be able to go out and do additional soil testing in all these locations between now and the next hearing, and it's something that the additional soil testing, I would like to think could be done in connection with final approval, but we can definitely.
I'd say the other big point here is, and this is what you were saying earlier, that there were some significant changes to the site layout, ignoring engineering altogether. So the closer we get to knowing, okay, this is the layout that both we and the town agree on, roughly, the more detail we can give about specific drainage locations. So if we go out next week and we do test pits on that, I'm just looking at this chart, the one that we just said that we don't have them on, but then at the next meeting we decide to put another bus stop or an open space there, right? Then that would have been for naught. So trying to make decisions about the general site layout helps us then get you more information about the specific drainage areas.
No, I don't disagree.
So
and that's-
Bishop just indicated that we could probably do some basic soil testing in those areas for infiltration purposes and get a sense of groundwater. And that's, I think, what you're looking for in those basins. And, it's not like we move things around. So where we weren't planning to do infiltration, we didn't have it. But now that it's there, where it's an area of concern adjacent to properties where we're in close proximity to neighbors, if Fisher can undertake it on a expedited basis, we can get a machine out there. So hopefully we can get to that.
that'd be have to coordinate with the Board of Health.
Can I ask, has
So
the
we should-
developer, and I might be overstepping here a little bit, but I know a couple meetings back, I think it was 3 meetings back, we had, Nancy was here from the Stormwater Committee as well, and asked the developer to please include her committee on all of the studies that are being done for the purposes of Stormwater Committee review. Has that been done? Are things being forwarded to the Stormwater Committee by either our council or, by you folks or anyone?
Well, I don't know the answer, but when we left, I don't know the answer as to whether it actually reached that committee, but when we left that hearing 2 hearings ago, the commitment was to make sure it was disseminated. She is here tonight, and, you know, I assume when we get into public comment and comments, we can
Okay.
find out exactly whether or not they have any additional feedback. But we had a brief exchange at the last continued hearing, where we're gonna continue to get more feedback, from that committee. So we can
Yeah.
hear more about that.
Okay. And is there anything else worth discussing right now from for Peter about the basins, or are we good to move on to traffic? Is there anything else that you wanna?
So we have to schedule those with, Board of Health?
I thought those were not, the Board of, well, inform the Board of Health, or you if you'd like to come witness them, but,
The Board of
As
Health,
long
I
as-
believe,
Should be
prefer us
involved.
to be the witness.
okay, now this may become a problem because, my plan was to take advantage of some warm weather, we're coming like next 2 days before that, dip in the temperature's gonna happen. And I'm happy to coordinate with them, but if they are not available until 2 weeks down the road, that may become a problem.
Understood,
Okay.
and I'm not available
Right.
in the next.
Well, I think since we're under extenuating circumstances here and we're volunteering to do this, if we have a certified soil examiner who's licensed by the state and they stamp it, again, for preliminary purposes, and, you know,
And we will notify the Board of Health, maybe they're available, I do not know.
we'll try,
We will
we'll try to
try.
get the Board of Health out there. I mean, for infiltration purposes, I think we can get some additional soil info that hopefully will put that concern to rest. But if it's a choice between having the Board of Health there and not doing it, or, you know, doing it without the Board of Health there and just getting it done, then we'd like to just get it done if that's a
That's what I was
concern.
gonna ask you, would you rather, I mean, is it good if they at least do that, or would you rather than not, I would rather have them wait until the Board of Health to be there?
Verified ones at some point, No. after, later.
Board of Health's gonna wanna see the.
The Board of Health-
For DEPS and
They don't wanna be there.
Absolutely.
you don't need it.
It's never been a requirement to have the Board of Health witness, but
Drainage.
drainage.
Yeah, it-
Drainage is always needed by a certified soil examiner.
I mean, I think that information has actually been presented as part of, what was submitted by the town's comments in response to the project eligibility request. I can go back into my file and double
I'm
check,
sorry,
but the
what
Board of Health
information?
submitted comments in response to the project eligibility notice that it
Yeah.
received on this development.
Right.
And from day one, I've seen that Board of Health indicate that they wanna make sure that they're present for, that all test pits need to be witnessed by a Board of Health agent, so. I think
Is
that's been an
that
ongoing.
where is that a local requirement? Cause I,
It's a very sensitive spot, and you guys have brought it to our attention, state, as well as we have. And Todd Billings has definitely made that comment and that statement in front of us in this meetings, coming up to this, that the Board of Health should be involved in all this stuff. And nobody's addressed it, it's just keeps going forward and forward, like Marguerite said. And I'm not speaking for the Board of Health agent, but I know they wanted to be involved with this a little more deeper, because it is a very sensitive project.
okay, so I think that might be an area where our commitment was to show that we can comply with the state stormwater management regulations. I am unaware of any state regulation for stormwater management that would require the Board of Health to be involved, and again, a stormwater management
It's
issue.
more of the pits, testing of the pits, he
But-
wanted to be there to see that.
Right, but the question is why? Because it's not a septic disposal
He requested
issue.
it, and that's what he asked us to do.
But where's I don't understand the motivation though, besides,
There may not be a.
There isn't, he just
There may
wanted-
not be a problem. If they're available, that would be great. But if they're not available, what we're trying to say
I
is.
got what you're saying, next week's gonna be -2,
Right,
3.
right,
Trust
and
me,
what we're saying,
I
what we're
understand
saying
what
is,
you're
we
saying.
realize that the Board of Health is requesting that, but but it is not a state requirement. You know, we're happy, we'll do our darnest to comply.
Well, can I just make a comment? Even if you go ahead and do these pits, I'm sure he's gonna wanna come back out and see it
That's not a
again.
problem.
So you're gonna end up doing it twice.
So
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at the Board of Health letter, and it says a third party or the Board of Health agent,
There you go.
back in June of 2018. So I think it would need to be somebody who's not affiliated with you at the very
we can
least.
get-
He may still wanna review them again, but at the very least, I would encourage
Yeah,
you
we'll
that if
get,
you're
we'll
going
get
to have
a
somebody
third,
be an
who
independent
is a
third
state
party
certified soil examiner.
who's not with one of your, not, you know,
Right.
an employee of one of your,
No, yeah. Yeah, that's not a problem, and maybe he's available, I don't know.
I would first check that out.
yeah.
Well, because I was, frankly, now that I know that, I was planning on getting a machine over tomorrow, or the day after. You know, because like I said, I wanna take advantage of there's a warm spell tomorrow and the day after before the temperature goes down to single digit.
I don't know the process, can they get a certified state, someone from the state quickly, that quickly, you
I'm
think?
sorry?
Can you get a state certified
Oh, absolutely.
that quickly, you think?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's not, it's a state licensed soil examiner, a certified soil examiner, it's just, you're yeah.
I would just encourage you that if you're not going to be having it be the Board of Health agent, that any information you submit, you provide whoever else was the witness
Yeah.
with it.
Sure.
So that we know and we can address that as needed, but, in the communications that have been submitted to the board, and also even after this was filed, it did say third party or Board of Health agent. I think
Okay.
generally, he would prefer be him, but
Yeah,
it does seem to have some flexibility.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I can arrange someone from my company on that short notice to get out there.
sure.
And I'm gonna be away all next week, so.
Alright, so that being said, I guess we can move on now to, the traffic study. Do you wanna speak on behalf of the updated information with that?
I can't see it, and I see the sidewalk. Is there a sidewalk throughout the project?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure, that just gave me.
Okay. Yep.
Kind of stands out with all the lines.
Right.
Oh, good, good.
Okay, again, for the record, my name's William Scully, I'm the Green International Affiliates, traffic consultant for this project. And I see Faisal's not here from Niche, but I won't speak for him, but I sort of will give you my interpretation of everything. You've gotten, this memo that they prepared December 31st. Probably were able to read it though a week or so after. I just distributed a letter I prepared today, which is really just a sort of concluding remarks so that, trying to tie up any loose ends and cross the Ts and everything. So you'll see in their letter on the 31st, there are a couple of comments, number 3, number 5, number 10, and 23. And 16. 16 is related to 3. That they've made some additional comments, not simply comment resolved. But I'll say in general, we believe, and I think Faisal would agree, that we really have resolved all the issues we can resolve it up to this point and at this point of the process. Keep in mind that this project will need access permits granted by Mass DOT, so there may be things that have to be done in addition to whatever we've done to date, submitted to DOT as part of the permit process. And in fact, in Faisal's comments and Nich's comments, there's a couple things in there that we will agree to bring a topic up or discuss issues such as potentially lowering speed limits, where can the town go to? A lot of these things, and you mentioned earlier tonight, I think you were talking about passing zone or no passing zone, speed limits, all that stuff. So that we can bring it up. We bring it up, and I have no problem bringing it up on behalf of the town. It's really a town requested DOT. And since 138 is DOT's road, they basically own and have jurisdiction and can do whatever sort of they want on that road. We do have to show, we've looked at site distances, we have to show, we'll submit the traffic report, we have to submit the approved overall site plan for the project, so that they see, and see that the board has approved the 40B project. So all of those things go through the process with DOT. They may ask for certain things. They may say, like we've committed to, for an example of purchasing and installing a speed feedback sign on 138 in the southbound direction to start to try to slow traffic down as it enters and approaches really Town Hall, Center Street, Post Office, all that stuff. My own personal opinion on traffic and transportation planning is I think it shouldn't be 45 miles an hour. Currently, probably where it is, it needs to start to slow down. You've got Stonegate developing. But I also think as time goes on and these homes are occupied, Stonegate's fully occupied, things are happening that it becomes more of a natural, okay, this area is a little more built up. So in the past, when nothing was there, 45, 50 miles an hour, in probably DOT state highway kind of mindset, wasn't an issue. Now, when going into the future, as this builds up, 35 to 40 miles per hour probably is the norm. Anyway, so our response or letter of the 14th really is simply addressing those few comment numbers that I just mentioned. And really, there really weren't major things. The applicant is to make another attempt to obtain full crash records and evaluate the fatal crash. So that, along with comment 16, dealt with crash history and all that. We've done as much of a crash analysis as one would typically do on a traffic impact study for a private development. And this is a residential development, and while we all can say it's a large development, it's over 100 units in comparison to a commercial type development, it's not very large in terms of traffic numbers and activity. But we followed procedures. It's not a design project, it's not a Mass DOT project. This is their road, but we looked at Center Street at the signal. We looked at the section of road, and I think it was at, and I honestly cannot recall who brought up the fatal crash on 138. I think it was at the November meeting, and Faisal brought that up again in our discussions over the last few weeks, and he couldn't quite remember it either. And it was inferred, I think, by the comment that, there was recently a fatal crash out there. So we really went digging. We went digging through Mass DOT data. I did end up, eventually, the holidays probably caused a little bit of an issue, but talked to the police department. We've all concluded, and the data seems to say, the one fatal crash that did happen on 138 since 2002 occurred in 2012, so about 7.5 years ago. We got a little bit more information on that. But again, if you look at that section of road, and I hate terming something dangerous, I don't think that's the right word. I mean, it's a high-speed, two-lane state highway. It's starting to change in terms of its character, so we have to start to adapt that. But the crash rate itself, looking at all the data over the years in the section of road, the crash history is lower, much lower than what typically is an average DOT crash history on this type of a road. That's not to say that we can't be careful, shouldn't be careful, but we have looked at that. And so that type of a crash, the only one since 2002 was 7.5 years ago. And we've got a little bit of information on that if you want to talk about it. I don't have a lot. I could not get, probably because of its age, and I know going through all the files, I could not get the actual crash reports filled out at that time. But it happened in July, it happened in the morning peak period, dry weather, clear weather, and it doesn't really give the cause or what happened to the driver.
Well, I'm reading it now. Isn't that one person was killed?
Correct.
I mean.
So it was a two-car crash, one person was killed. So I tried to give you as much information as I could get.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the
Give you a
general,
little more information.
that's fine, it was in the general area.
1981.
1981.
Fatality, okay, right there on the hill, by that, and if you look at me the way you just looked, I'm gonna tell you what it was about. Frank Costa, our selectman, it was his son, was ran over picking up matchbox cars that fell out of his little box, and the lady ran him over. So there is another fatality, and this is another reason why I'm talking to you guys about the playground. That happened back in the 80s. I'm not saying that your records go back that far. So fatality to me is enough to, one person's life is
Absolutely.
enough for me to call that road dangerous. Okay, I will call that road dangerous, because it is dangerous. That is a dangerous location where you're exiting, and a dangerous location where you're entering. We don't have any flashing lights, we have nobody's talked about putting anything on Mass DOT at the end of the roads, top of the roads, flashing, dangerous intersections coming up, watch out for development. We haven't talked about any of that. So these are the things, the reason why we're asking you guys to do your due diligence. But when you sit here and tell me that one fatality to me is enough. One.
Okay, so let me step back a little bit. And I don't mean to, I agree, we're going to Vision Zero, so we
Right.
don't want any
Right.
fatalities. I don't have a problem with that. All I'm saying is that, one, it was back in 2012, it wasn't recent. I didn't know about the 1981, that
No,
was
you wouldn't.
40
It's
years
too bad.
ago. So, and when I'm talking about the speed feedback sign, that's one of the things that we wanna do, coming southbound, north of the project site, to start, and what that does, it's a passive way
A
to,
little bit of heads up, yeah.
gives a heads up, and it's been shown to reduce, average speeds anywhere from 3 to 5, 7 miles an hour. It reduces the percentage of people who are way over the speed limit. So I'm not gonna say I take exception, but, you know, we are trying, I mean, we're
Right.
trying to,
I
we
know
are
a lot of
doing
it's
something.
DOT is, they're the ones that have to make the ultimate
That's
decision when it
correct.
goes there.
So what we've agreed to do, based on my discussions with Faisal, is we're gonna bring these things up to DOT during the permit process. And like I said, I'd be happy, I'll add the no passing zone. It probably shouldn't be there,
Right.
particularly as we develop, because then
Should
we've
be
got
worse.
2 more driveways. We do meet the site distance criteria, so from a potentially safe egress or entrance into the site, we've done everything we could. In our criteria, we hit 50 miles an hour. So we measured 45 to 47 miles an hour. Yes, I can show you data that,
Actually,
yeah,
right.
there's a few people way above 50, but very few. 85th percentile is in that 47, 48. So we're taking steps, and in one of the steps we did, and I asked Mitch to give us some direction. In December, we provided a memo that said, okay, we can meet criteria at certain things. If Strawberry Lane comes in here, potentially we might affect this property to make sure all the vegetation and trimming and all that is clear. So we showed a couple of options, and
Was that
I
option triangle, was that at a 50-mile-an-hour rating? or-
Correct.
Okay.
it's more than that even,
Okay.
so we had a couple of options, and I asked them, I said, give me some direction
Mhm.
on, do you want us, we can shift, we have the ability, because of this drainage area, to shift Strawberry Lane up a little bit more, and that way we get the sight lines as well as all the vegetation that we have to clear is either on our property or state layout, which is, that's not a problem, and we don't have to get an easement or talk to this about. If the state does not want to have us put in the speed feedback sign, and District 5 is a little funny. If I was in District 3, they'd probably say, fine, but you're gonna have to, you do it and submit us paperwork and we'll approve it. District 5, I can't always say what they're gonna do, but if they don't, there's a couple things. One is, there are other areas in town that can use certain things, so that type of equipment or funds for it can be provided, as well as we can talk to DOT about what other options do we have. Like you mentioned, well, you could put advanced warning signs that there's an intersection there. There's other things that can be done. The speed limit issue is a tough one because they traditionally look at collecting a lot of data, and they set speeds basically on how people are driving. So the theory is if people feel very comfortable driving 55 miles an hour down Somerset Ave, and all the data shows it, they'll say, we'll set it at 45. You sure you want us to change it? Because we'll change it to 55. But as things get denser, then they have a few more options where they can start to go, well, it's kind of thickly settled. And there's a lot more stop and go here because of more development. All right, so now let's collect. We may not be able to change everything until the development really is going and you collect data that starts to show, oh, the norm is 35 to 40 miles an hour now. And then they go along. Now, in the industry, we've been trying to get speed limit methods and how we set them changed up a little bit. But it's still, this is their road. So we've agreed to bring it up, talk to them about it on behalf of the town. No passing zone I'll bring up. We are proposing the speed feedback sign to slow traffic down. Location to be, agreed upon by, we can do with DOT, Tom Ferry. We have an idea. And we know that that's a weird spot because of you're transitioning between 40 and 45 mile an hour. So we may not be able to maybe get them to absolutely change the speed limits right now, but we might be able to talk to them about, how about this transition zone? It's kind
A
of
little bit of warning
funny,
signs,
so
yeah.
maybe we push something up a little. So anyway, we're trying to be responsive, and we think we have on that. And agreed to, to do those kinds of things. I wasn't aware of the 138 in all my conversations.
It just happened.
Okay, so I hate missing stuff. But you're right, I mean, if they're starting in Rainham, and who knows, but I'll find out
So
about that.
today.
Yeah, there's
That's how I
actually
knew.
a
Today.
public meeting that was posted today
Today.
Yeah.
on the
wow.
town website.
All right, so if it's a tip project, it's kind of crummy because it takes forever. But I know the Center Street, we got, in fact, I had helped Mallory a little bit with the grant, and that comes down to Center Street to the intersection. We've agreed to talk to DOT during our permit process about the intersection itself. I don't think geometrically you're gonna be able to do much because of property and everything, but it's a state signal, it's pretty old, it's not ADA compliant, and they are very big on pushing that ADA compliance these days.
I'm involved in that.
Yeah, so we may be able to push them to actually, all right, let's move this intersection up on our to-do list and get something done there. So, let's see, what else? Okay, on the school bus thing, it's not shown completely, but typically what we find happens with these developments is that, the school department and the school bus contractor, every year, let's say July, August, they start going, okay, what are we doing for our routes this year? What new developments, and then they start to make adjustments. So, for this one, they're not gonna make any decision at this point. They won't make a decision until there's a kid to pick up. The other, and I believe we've said that, the piece leading up to the loop would potentially be public street or not?
No, it's not gonna get.
So that will be another question, because school buses don't always, there's been some developments where the public school bus to pick up the public school kids will go into a private development. But there's a lot of them that won't, so.
They negotiate it every year.
That's correct, so.
What's good today is not gonna be good tomorrow.
I fully agree. So what we've done, and in our letter and in Faisal's letter, is there's a couple of options that if they're allowed to, you know, if the school bus says, yes, we're coming in, then we have the loop designed, we've tested it for school bus. I don't think Greg's made all the changes yet. In fact, right here, so we've shown the right of way, but not the pavement edge up for this change. Did the same thing at the bus loop a little bit. Nich's comments asked for a little bit of tweaking in that area just for potentially even though it'll be really close to walk, and probably closer than I walked to the school bus as a kid, you know, you're gonna have 5 or 6 parents pull up and wait for the bus, or in the morning or afternoon. So we may tweak the edge of the road in that area so that they can park without tightening up the width that much.
I have actually a question on that, so,
Okay.
go ahead.
So I just wanted to add, if the bus contractor decides, I'm not coming on the site, then, and they'd be stopping on 138 like they do, then we would define a pad spot, up in the corner at Strawberry and Somerset, so the kids would wait outside the,
That's actually
away from Somerset.
what I was gonna ask about. So, you know, if we eventually, if it's decided that we're gonna shift the Strawberry Lane, are we saying north possibly, or would it be south?
North. The shift is a little bit north.
So that would potentially affect the drainage lot, that's fair.
Yeah, correct.
So then, where would the bus stop go at that, the bus pad, I'm
Well,
sorry?
if it moved up here and the bus is stopped here, then let's say in this little pocket right here, again, picture if a sidewalk was coming up here, you'd have a sidewalk or a little concrete pad next to the sidewalk where kids could, might be 10 by 10, and the kids could wait there. Again, out of the road, away from the road, potentially with a little
Is
roof
there, and I'm
can.
asking this because I can't see it,
Mhm.
of course, so I don't know.
Mhm.
But across the street from what would be the entrance now or exit now, is that land state land or is that somebody's private home directly across? And if it's state or town, could potentially the developer put a pad on the other side too? And the reason I'm saying that is because we don't know yet, and it's always subject to change, how the bus routes are gonna go. So there could be potential for the bus to be dropping off or picking up on the opposite side of the road,
True.
with children having to cross and cars trying to go
They would
around
go
the
south.
buses and so forth.
So,
The bus,
but
right,
what
buses
they
run
do
south.
is,
But they could change their route depending upon,
true, but I would
So-
I would not have the kids cross the street, and the school buses stop in the street, put the guards out,
that doesn't.
everyone, well, they're
I
supposed
wish
to.
I could say
What-
it's a
well,
magic,
Well, you can't control, it's 99.5% of the time, people are stopping with the school bus lights on, the bus drivers are trained better these days, and they don't let the kids out until they're sure nothing is happening. And then you let the kids cross. And the buses don't pull off to the side, they stay in the lane so that there's no perceived passing. So I wouldn't want a pad across the street and encourage the kids to cross when the school bus hasn't arrived yet.
It couldn't anyway, there's homes there, it's not town homes,
Okay.
but, yeah.
So I'm not saying, I don't mean that's a bad idea, but
No, it may be a bad idea.
it's a bad idea.
It's all right.
But I mean, I just, I'm kind of big on that, you know. And maybe I put a little too much stress, and I know there's people that blow through, but it's getting more and more, and the equipment's changing, and the lights are being modified.
It's all better today. Fisher, are you gonna put a sign up like you do at Stonegate?
Yes,
Okay. And you're gonna maintain they're gonna maintain the vegetation around that site?
yes.
One of the things, Stony Ridge, one of the things that we put in, and it's still not done to this day, when we did Stonegate, and I know it's not finished, was, a condition that the developer, while it was being filled, maintain the vegetation at the end of Center Street. And nobody has touched it because of, we figured because of the increased traffic. That's not a concern of yours, Center Street isn't, but the housing committee for your development will have to have some kind of condition in there that they maintain that vegetation for the sightlines when they come out of that project.
So I'd like to just also say, so we've developed what the sightline should be.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, if this is the plan that's finalized, we've stated, we've agreed with, Faisal has stated in his that sightlines will be shown on the site plan part of. So it will define an area that has to be,
Kept
you know,
clean.
Clear.
keep clear,
Right.
any vegetation low-lying.
Yeah.
Not, you could have street signs or, you know, certain
Right.
things, but they have to, again, be set back or,
Okay.
And I think it says in here that you designed it so that way all of those sightlines were on our controlled
they'll
property.
be our controlled property
Right,
or within the public state layout.
right.
Okay.
So I'm sorry I took a long time.
No.
but,
It's all right,
yeah, I wanted you to understand certain things.
Marguerite, I know our representative for traffic isn't here. Is there anything that you can, any feedback you can provide that you know that's been discussed?
I appreciate that you addressed, I think, some of the primary areas that he had talked about. I haven't had a chance to look at what appears to have been submitted today and compare it to all of his pieces, but I agree those were the ones that stuck out in my mind. I think maybe what needs to be cleared up for this board is come next iteration of the plan, are you gonna commit to the design of Strawberry Lane based on Mr. Scully's recommendations, or, you know, cause that may have some impact on the drainage analysis with that drainage lot. Are you going to show what you're really planning as your contingency for this concrete pad? Because I think this board, has expressed ongoing concern around what's this bus stop gonna look like, and I think you have a lot more control within the development, but it's this concern about Route 138, and if, depending on what the bus company and the school department decides to do down the road, we just wanna have at least some level of knowledge about what the alternative will look like. So are those things you'll be able to provide with the
Yeah.
next plan?
Yeah, so I think, and Bill, correct me if I'm mistaken, your letter today kind of addresses that to some degree.
I tried,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
But yeah,
I've
but she's
seen some
going
of it in
further
yours.
of saying, okay,
I wanted
now
to
if
see
we
it.
agreed all this,
Yeah.
will the plans reflect
yeah,
what
so,
we're talking about?
yeah, I think maybe we can show potential future pad area.
Yeah, like
And maybe
like
even
a
a
detail,
detail
yeah.
of what that pad will look like. Is there parking, I mean, just those are the questions I would envision the board having as they analyze this in the final decision. What's the contingency plan, because I think that's been recommended and agreed to, there should be a contingency plan, and what does that look like? Not just a pad, but what's the detail, a little bit of detail on it, so is it a shelter or a pad? How many is it designed to accommodate, is there parking in that area? I think that there's been ongoing conversation about, and especially even listening tonight, how large a site, in terms of area this is, with all the different types of houses that, you know, likely parents are probably going to be, especially in poor weather, tending to drive their kids to that bus stop, at a minimum. So where are we gonna accommodate cars that may show up in that bus stop area?
But so-
Those are all things that if the board knows they're gonna be presented with for next meeting, you don't have to answer that tonight,
But
obviously.
the question is now, are we supposed to show, both, like, within the site, we had a here and here?
Well, I think the concern is that there's no knowledge that the school system and the bus company agree they're going to be picking the students up within the site. In fact, the experience the town has is that when it's a private road, that they aren't doing that. Or at least for a period of time while it's being built and there's not enough kids there, they may not be picking them up right away. So what's your backup plan? What's it look like if they pick it up on 138? What's the parking gonna look like in that
Okay,
area? So that people aren't just creating their own stop and their own parking.
Right,
Yeah,
You know.
I think it can be, it can be conceptual for the contingency and, like a detail cutout
Yeah,
to show the area.
What I had envisioned, based on my previous experience in town, is that main road, by main road as opposed to this here and this here,
right.
will be turned over to the town, like what happened on the Pines and hopefully at Stony Ridge as well. So this is why we left this as the bus stop. But what I don't wanna do is have two separate buildings, bus stops, to maintain and worry about.
And I understand that, but I think there's a couple of things that go with that. One of the comments I was going to make tonight a little later was, you've submitted a waiver request list. I don't know if you've taken a look at that since you revised your plans, but if you may wanna do that, because if you're looking to have this board start deliberating next meeting, you're not gonna be able to submit anything further after that. So you're held to those waiver requests. I don't know, where those waiver requests address. I haven't seen enough design around the internal road layout. Are they meeting the planning board requirements to be accepted as a town way? Is there a waiver request associated with it? If not, and we know that doesn't happen till the design, till final build out,
Sure.
so there likely could be a few years
Yes.
where you may still have it as a private way,
True.
and you're still gonna have to address school bus pickup.
Yeah.
So those are the pieces that it
What I
could
was-
be, yeah.
Sure, what I was
Could be.
proposing is maintaining a bus stop here
Mhm.
and having,
Yeah,
Bill-
there, the
Bill
road,
said, a secondary contingency here, a pad, that we can, that can be used in the interim.
Right.
And, yeah, so we will do that.
And with that pad, please talk about what's the parking, temporary parking concept that you're looking at, so that we just don't have parents blocking that entryway.
Yeah.
I think that there was legitimate questions around looping, how would we go about looping, but if we've got parents parked on both sides of that road and it's a winter storm and you need to get an ambulance in there, I mean, those are just I've heard the board, just in my experience with this board, ask these types of questions at the point that they're trying to make final decisions, so
Okay.
if you could think about that for next meeting.
Yes.
I think everyone does prefer that bus stop happen within the development and not on 138,
Sure.
but we just know that nobody sitting here has the ability to make that final decision, so
I
you gotta at least know that there's something that everyone's comfortable with as a safe-ish alternative, and not as safe as it could be, but safe where everyone feels comfortable with it.
yeah, and that's what we'll work on. I think, it seemed like one of the major concerns about trying to put the bus stop into it was so that way we didn't have kids at the end of at the corner of the street. I personally would just be concerned that if we have too much of an infrastructure there for people to wait, then either the bus company may push for it, hey, it's right there, why aren't we just, doing it that way? If they don't have that option. So we'll put something together that, again, gives us a way to make sure that if it is used, that it's not blocking the road, but,
Yeah, I mean, you may have to have
too
some
formal
steering,
and you might end up
maybe part
kids
of whatever your
going
snowplow
there.
removal plan is, or some of that other stuff.
Right.
Cause one thing too, I was just looking at the plan too, and I don't know exactly the distance between, I think it'd be the Perry and Catherine Jones's property to the side of your road, but like, I don't know if there would be enough space there to put a shelter or pad with parking. So would that mean you would have to shift Strawberry Lane?
It's actually
That's-
shifted from that plan.
That's definitely gonna shift up?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, that's what this plan is showing, that it shifts up this way.
Okay,
In order to create the site triangle.
okay.
we need.
okay,
What
This
happens
plan
at
will be
Stony
updated
Ridge now?
in the next iteration.
okay.
The bus
There's a
just-
bus stop,
Right, do they use that bus stop?
Yes.
So,
The bus stop at Stony Ridge, the way Stony Ridge, I can only speak to Stony Ridge, I'm not gonna address the Pines, but for Stony Ridge, the bus that goes through the development, remember, the development is shaped like a giant oval, like a, sort of like a track,
Right.
or a lollipop, you know, if you will, with a stick, being Galway Drive. You've got a bus that comes in and makes a loop around, one way. It's not one, and now that's the other side of this. If there were theoretically a bus and a truck trying to go by the same time in opposite directions, in Stony Ridge, it's very, very tight to do that. It would be almost impossible for a large truck and a bus to pass one another. So, that's a concern I have in terms of the width of the, you know, the main reed roads you're gonna have in there. But even others, if buses potentially are gonna go through there eventually to become a public way. So that's one concern, just on everybody's radar.
But is the bus stop
But,
used?
but right now, there is a bus on the outside, the bus stop is on the outside, right at the edge of, Pine Street.
Pine Street,
And the middle school and the high school buses only go to that point.
yeah.
But that bus stop, and this is a key factor, I think, even for the bus stop does have, there is a pull out there for, what'd you say, 8 cars maybe, Bishop?
Yeah.
To park in.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of space for those 8 cars to comfortably move in and out, back in, back out, without affecting the flow of traffic. But that also means that the bus stop itself is angled to the side, it's not facing out. So it's not straight across Pine Street like this, it's angled more like this, as you come out the road.
Perpendicular to Pine Street.
So, perpendicular more so. My concern would be how potentially a 3-sided bus stop might set in this area as well, because it has to be perpendicular, I would think, as opposed to angle out for, if for nothing else, than for safety reasons.
I'm
Or-
sorry, are you saying it has to be
It would have to
perpendicular
be
to Somerset or?
Similar to the way it is right now at Stony Ridge.
Right.
It would
Yes.
have to be on that similar angle, because for safety purposes, otherwise it's almost straight out into, in front of you into traffic. If a kid gets up from the seat and runs out 10 feet, he's in the middle
We
of the
would
road.
regulate that over there last
So you
Another
ha-
thing to keep in mind,
So,
so DOT's not gonna allow us
Right.
to build a pad in the layout,
Right.
their layout, so we're gonna be set back out of their right of way for this.
So
Anything
why not
that
just
happens with the school
put the
bus.
bus stop back there?
Yeah.
Why go
put
with
back-
2 or?
I would not go with two.
you're not
My
gonna go with 2, I
recommendation isn't
understand
two, is if the bus company doesn't wanna,
Hold on,
or
I think-
can't go in, then we're forced to have
What
something.
is this Peter's point, yeah.
If your concern was not having the bus stop so close to Somerset Avenue, there's a chance that the bus company can't pull in anyway, so they're gonna be dropping them off there. So why not just go forward and say, this is where the bus stop's gonna be? Either way, you're
Just
looking at the
take
same,
the loop out
take the loop out altogether and just put it back at the
Maybe
entrance.
becomes a-
That would provide room for a potential recreation area too, if the bus stop, if the bus stop within the property was moved.
I just have, sorry,
Yeah, that could work.
I just had a question too. So say the kids on Huckleberry Lane have to get to the bus stop, even if it's over here on Strawberry. Are you gonna have a path so they're not cutting through all of, like, the Joneses, like, property or walking, like, just something so they're not going all the way around if they have to follow the street level? Just to get to the bus stop, so between the townhouses, maybe a walkway
Yeah,
or-
we would.
Right, that's,
Yeah.
that was what, yeah.
Okay.
And, get another question.
Can you show us
Oh my
at
God,
some
I
point?
didn't
and
see
if-
that.
It's not,
Sorry.
yeah, but, it's not
Sorry.
close though.
I didn't even see this one, I'm sorry.
I have a question, it's nothing really to do with, traffic and stuff, but we were talking about, I remember when this all came in front of us, and you said you were gonna do, this was gonna be a public road.
Yes.
Alright, so we're building this to public Massachusetts, with Tommy Ferry standards. All these particular roads, he's gonna give you you're not gonna be able to cut corners with the binder code, the underlayment, all that stuff's gonna be done with one sidewalk on one side, all the way around the infrastructure.
Yes.
So this is gonna be a public road, I just wanna clear that up,
Well-
except for where the condos and as the cottages.
Right.
So sometimes gonna privately plow.
But we're not gonna be in conformance with the width.
And why is that?
They've asked for a waiver.
Yeah.
Okay, and another thing, garbage, we talked about that, now there's gonna be a garbage truck going through this place picking up all of the garbage.
Yeah.
How's it gonna work at the condos? You're gonna have garbage dumpsters, or you gonna have?
Yeah.
So those are gonna be enclosed, we never really discussed that, they're gonna be enclosed behind
Yeah.
containment doors?
The cottages, they will have have, they will leave, bins outside.
Yeah, but the
Here,
condos,
here,
that's
yeah,
what I'm talking
yeah,
about, right
this,
there.
we will have a dumpster.
A dumpster.
Right.
So who determines the width and all that for that dumpster truck to get into there?
The width of the.
Where would the dumpster corral be?
We'll, show.
I don't see it, I'm sorry, I was just going through a few things as I'm looking at this plan,
Yeah.
and I don't see anything that shows a dumpster corral.
When we had when they were, not Bishop, when they were here before us, there was gonna be dumpster
It's
pickup.
gonna be private,
It was gonna be private, and we wanted it fenced in
Yeah,
and corralled, as well as no garbage outside of the,
That's why I asked about basements earlier on all this
Right.
stuff too, yeah.
No garbage outside of what, I'm sorry?
outside of the dumpster, like somebody
Right.
can't leave a couch there.
Right.
Just something to think about, Bishop, on that
Sure.
part too, just where, how you gonna get a dumpster truck in there with cars, and that's how you configure that parking lot.
Thanks.
Turn.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
And I thought we did this already with the fire department for the widths and all this, so the fire department's fine with this road?
Yes.
Cause I wanna say he gave his blessing,
I
so that's a
thought
large
the fire
piece of
department said that
apparatus.
they wanted to see more expansion.
The only place he was talking about was up at the very top corner, that could all be configured.
Yeah, there was an email that I forwarded from the fire chief.
Yeah, we had that at the last meeting. Do you want
Okay,
to-
no, as long as, I just wanna make sure we're covering all bases there, about this bus corral and stuff, just all covered.
There's a few tweaks,
You
not
guys
necessarily
seen
from
this
the
already?
fire department, but
I think there was some.
we've been
questions
coordinating
about
with Greg on
I like that.
some of the, really minor tweaks to accommodate those, fire apparatus or the school bus.
I think they had some questions about weight, didn't they?
I don't remember where.
The fire trucks, I think the fire department had some questions about the weight of
This
the
is
vehicles.
apparatus access in the townhouses, that's waivers, et cetera. That's pretty much what I'm saying.
Last time we didn't want a ring road, but we
I
wanted
remember,
it.
yeah, here, this one, we wanted something in the back.
Fisher, is
That
part of
side that
this, is
would
part
be
of
a
this
width
then,
for
Hold on,
a fire
hold on.
truck.
okay,
Are you guys done?
I just wanna be clear so that we're clear. Which part of the development would be public road, potential full public road that the town would take over by petition, I'm assuming? And which part would remain private?
All of cranberry and strawberry and blueberry will be public. The private is the Huckleberry and the condo association,
The
the town.
townhouse is
Yeah.
the parking lot for the townhouse.
So part of this ultimately, if it were petitioned to become public road, or public way once it's finished, would potentially be maintained by the town, but those other areas would be maintained by the homeowner associations?
Correct. Correct. The reason being that it'd be private property. The townhouses, this would be one lot with its own private property to maintain.
Alright, Marguerite, is there anything else for the related to the traffic that you wanna speak on? Besides from what was already discussed?
No, I mean, I anticipate, because I know that Niche has been pretty responsive, that they'll take a look at, this was sent over to them
Yes, it
today,
was,
so I'm
yeah.
sure they'll submit any remaining open items for the next meeting, and they've usually been giving that fairly quickly,
Yeah.
and with enough room for you to
I'm hoping this
respond.
closes their open items. But yes, I
I'll
emailed to
follow
Faisal
up,
tonight.
yeah, I'll follow up with Faisal too after this meeting and make sure that there isn't anything more.
Mhm.
But just hopefully we have the next plans and whatever you're submitting for the next meeting can show some of the things that appear to have been agreed upon in terms of plan design.
Okay. So next, I'm just going to open, the floor for, public input. I know we have, Nancy's here tonight. Nancy, do you have anything you wish to share, or are you just here for, just to observe?
Thank you, Mr. Gale, for remembering that. Since we really didn't have a meeting last time,
Mhm.
I was talking to Chris and the other gentleman and told him what the Stormwater Committee was looking for, so that they would be aware of this before this meeting,
Mhm.
so that they could address those issues. As far as the plans, the only plans that I'm aware of are the set that were was given out at the last meeting. Have there been any revisions since that set of plans was given out? Because that's what I gave to our health agent.
So,
Yep.
I can answer that. So, no, another plan set has not been submitted, but we're ready on the verge of submitting this one that's up here.
Okay,
And I think that was just dated as of today even.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
There's one
So
sheet that it is.
you have the latest and greatest, but there, as we talked about earlier, the plan is continuing to evolve and we're into the details on the stormwater management design at this point.
okay. The other thing was
Wait,
that.
I'm sorry, so I saw yesterday that at least 2 pages of the plan set was submitted, or, again,
To me,
Page 11, page 20, I believe.
is that right?
Yeah. Not the full set, just those two.
Yeah, and again,
Okay.
that was an engineer to engineer, just as a courtesy in advance of this one. I mean, we haven't done a formal, full-blown plan submission that's the new plan set.
That'll be coming soon and you'll receive.
So,
Yeah.
the 2 pages that Marguerite just mentioned, is this part of the new plan that will be coming out?
Yes.
it
Okay,
potentially could be revised.
That
Right.
potentially, right, yeah, that
Okay.
was an engineer to engineer, it wasn't
okay.
intended.
But when this next set of plan comes out, everybody's gonna be looking at the same thing,
Yes.
okay?
Oh.
All right,
Yep.
fine. Another thing was, that we had talked about concerns about witnessing test pits. And I know that, our health agent, Mr. Pilling, did mention, somebody who is a licensed soil evaluator. Mr. Pilling is away this week, so he wouldn't be available to witness, anything tomorrow or Friday either. So, in any case, if an independent state licensed person could certify what was seen, obviously we would give that to Mr. Pilling and that would be his decision.
Sure.
And would obviously talk to the person that witnessed
Sure.
the test. I think for the most part, right now, obviously the next thing is going to be the new set of plans, the latest revision that everyone will get. Any testing that is done, that is witnessed by a, independent licensed soil evaluator. And then we'd be going from there. I will be sure that Mr. Pilling gets a copy, or Roz, if you would, the copy of the report from, Mr. Williams.
Yes.
So he will have that and know what issues he has commented on. That would be helpful. I'm mainly concerned, and what I'm hearing tonight, I'm feeling positive about. I'm mainly concerned about, whenever I hear you talk about things, I'm thinking about and I won't call them problems, but some of the things we questioned on the Aggie School project. Obviously, you're building a housing development, they're building a campus. But when it comes to test pits and things like that, some of the questions or comments I heard tonight were things we discussed when we met with them. We got them all ironed out, but, I think with what I'm hearing tonight, with what Mr. Williams has put together and what I'm expecting, to see if you go ahead with testing, I don't think we should have a major problem. But again, I'm assuming, everything is going to be done as described here tonight, independent. If it's not gonna be town engineer or the health agent, then it's independent, a state license, everything, so forth and so on. Obviously, either the town or the, Mr. Town engineer or Mr. Pilling may have questions, but as I said, when the last meeting didn't take place, I made it a point to let Chris and others know, hey, we're gonna be talking about this, we're looking for this, and rather waiting until the next official meeting, you need to know ahead of time, this is what Stormwater's looking at, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Alright, is there anybody else in the public that wishes to speak tonight?
Mr. Chairman, I just have 2 quick process points. Dennis Murphy on behalf of the Country Hill abutters. Number 1 is, now that we're getting near final plans, I would suggest, and also the regulations recommend, that you send this to at least the Concom, but any board, any local board that may have reason to look at this. You may have sent the initial application 6 months ago when it first came in, but given the changes, the reason is that in the waiver request, you're being asked to waive bylaws that don't normally come under your jurisdiction, such as the wetlands bylaw. And if you're gonna decide whether to waive that, you ought to hear from the board or commission that ordinarily administers that. And if they gave you a comment letter in June based on the old set of plans, it probably is not worth a whole lot today, given how the plans have changed over time. So just as a process, we ought to just send the latest set of plans to the other boards and commissions. The second point is, I'll just remind the board that we're coming up on 6 months, and under the rules, you have a 180-day public hearing, and just so that there's no question about compliance with the rules, you might get an extension tonight, because I think the next time you meet is likely to be beyond that 180-day deadline. Thank you.
Anybody else? Just state your name just for the record, please.
Randy Chase, 900 Somerset Ave. It was talked about in November, and then it's on Mr. Williams, number 17 here about the no-touch buffer zone for the people on Somerset Ave. And Fisher and I talked, he's talking about putting up a fence, but I just like to get that on record, because he said there's not enough room there for a 10-foot buffer like they have on Country Hill.
Yeah, just for the benefit of the board, I met with Mr. Chase. This is his property here. We do not have 10-foot buffer. This is one of the comments that Mr. Williams had. And what we agreed to is we would erect a fence, an 8-foot fence, in lieu of the 10-foot buffer, because you have to realize this level here is substantially lower than this level. So it varies from like 4 to 6 feet, or maybe even 8 in some spots.
Yeah.
Lower. So that being lower and having an 8-foot fence, we felt that it'd afford them enough buffer, like a shield. So we're happy to do that, and that may become a condition as well.
Okay.
What kind of fence?
Okay, we're gonna put a vinyl fence. We felt that 8-foot fence will become like a prison.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do 6-foot fence and then 2 feet of lattice on top. Just gonna dress it up a little bit. Right?
Correct.
And that's gonna go for the 3 properties, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Will that be shown on the plans?
We could show it on the plan.
Yeah, we could show it on the plan. Oftentimes it's, some
Condition.
boards prefer to have a spelled out condition that,
Okay.
you know, these properties, 3 properties, 8-foot fence, lattice combination.
I
It's
suggest it be
preference.
both, a condition
No problem.
specifying the construction requirements and then,
Yeah.
you know,
Where would that-
location, so there's no misunderstanding.
Where would that be posted? Would it be on your property, on
Yeah,
the,
it's
on
on,
which properties?
like few inches on our property.
And also too, how far down would it go? Is it
It'll go-
just go along his I mean, not along on his property, but along his property?
It'll go like this,
It's, okay, the entire,
the
okay,
3 properties.
okay,
Yeah, that's why, show it on the plan.
okay.
Yeah, we'll show it on the plan to avoid any confusion.
And is there any other public input tonight? No? Marguerite and Peter, is there anything else that you think you wanna address for them to do for the next meeting specifically that we haven't already talked about?
I just wanna try to, I guess, respond to what Chris was talking about at the beginning of the meeting. I mean, the waivers is certainly an area that I felt you may wanna be also taking a look at for submission for the next meeting. I agree with Attorney Murphy around, the need for an extension. It was something I was going to be talking about as well tonight. I know the desire is to try to have the board start deliberating at the next meeting. I think that certainly this board has begun kind of public deliberations, and started them once they felt that they've gotten all the abutter comments they need and their own peer review comments, and they're at a stage where the plan design is pretty much set. While perhaps there may still need to be another public hearing that's held, just to provide an opportunity for additional submissions if that might be needed. I think what we might not have seen yet is for these board members to really get a final sense of all the level of detail of everything that's coming in, so I hear what you're saying, I don't think it's a desire to delay anything, but I'm not sure that I would recommend the board close the public hearing at the next meeting, especially if they're just receiving new waiver requests. I don't disagree actually with the comment that we go back to some of these town boards that saw a very different plan and did provide comment and give them an opportunity to provide input into the record. And so that just needs to happen, and I mean, it's really a matter of saying, do we wanna push this public meeting out far enough so that we can have all of that take place beforehand, or do we want to hold an interim public meeting, which I think would probably be more appropriate, so we can get just a good sense of, hey, this is it, we're not really making any large modifications to this plan design right now, here's the details that we need, we've got everything, and here's what we might just still be looking to receive, and here's the comments and period of time that we're waiting on. So I hear what you're saying, Chris, I know that there's a desire to move this forward, I think this board is at a point too where it's looking to try to bring this to a close. But given the fact that there was a few months where we spent kind of redesigning this and, you know, collaboratively, I think you listened very carefully to some of the input from the town and came up with a very different style that seems to be, you know, certainly, something that the town is looking to provide deliberation on, and they appreciate that. It might just allow us to, we just really haven't, this is really the first meeting we've had with this plan design. So, you know, 2 meetings with a plan design is just pushing it.
Yeah, we have no problem with that.
Yeah, and I think if I could just elaborate, we talk about closing the public hearing, I think that can take many forms. And I think the point we were getting at is, sometimes as these meetings draw to a close, you get a sudden influx of people that haven't been at all the prior meetings, and they start making repetitive comments. So, you know, the idea of closing the public hearing, because the board is now getting into the details, and we might wanna leave open the possibility of additional submissions from the applicant, additional collaboration with the board, it might not be a requirement to formally close the public hearing. But if the board and the chair had an understanding that we were gonna be sparing in how that hearing was handled as far as additional public comment, to not unnecessarily drag out things with repetitive comments about, you know, hey, why aren't we talking about the bus stop orientation or these things? So I think that's our motivation in trying to say, let's have some demarcation point. You know, totally understanding that we went through a major redesign that did add some additional time to the public hearing process. I think we might actually be beyond the 180 days, believe it or not.
I'm trying to figure out, I was looking at that myself, because I had, in my head, had beginning of February, but I think I was calculating it from August 14th.
I have June 26th is
Yeah.
the first hearing.
That's what I was going back to.
But again, this is not the type of applicant that would try to rush to something like that. We're happy to extend for a couple months tonight, you know, and then keep an eye on where that deadline lies. So, you know, happy to take care of that, to brush that under the rug. So with those things in mind, I don't think we have to make a decision tonight. Let's keep the next hearing on the agenda. We'll plan to have an additional, submission 2 weeks prior to that. You know, hopefully we can, I saw Mr. Scully's submission. I looked through it quickly, and it looks like resolved. You love to see, you know, those peer review comments come to a close, you know, as far as making sure those issues are checked off. But I do think, you know, there's obviously gonna be some additional submissions, and then at the next hearing, maybe we can say from a preliminary perspective, concerns about stormwater are resolved, and then have a discussion about what it looks like to move forward from there. And we can talk about mechanically whether we push to close the public hearing, or just say that we at this point have submitted everything we're gonna submit, but to the extent there's anything else that you might want additional material on, we'll keep it open for that purpose, or there are many, you know, forms it can take.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask of our council.
Sure.
Through our council, could you briefly explain to a couple of us who haven't been through this process before, this committee, what's involved with the extension request and how long it's for? And the reason I ask that specifically is I'm thinking of the postponement that we had to have last month, unfortunately because of an illness, as opposed to another designee. Partly was because the developer wanted to make sure certain rights were protected and so forth as well, and I wanna make sure that simply to agreeing to an extension doesn't negate whether we need to legally file for an extension so that we're protected.
So this is just an extension of the public hearing process
Right.
that the developer would need to submit for the record, and then they wouldn't be able to make an argument that this was somehow constructively approved by the board, which is a process they'd still have to follow as well. So if you tonight obtain from the developer a written extension of the deadline to close the public hearing, to whatever period that's agreed upon, we keep that as well in our minds. Now, the point that the public hearing is closed, there's also a time frame that begins to run for your period of deliberation until you issue a decision. And I think as we get into the next meeting and get a general sense of, what's been received, what still might the board be looking to have submitted into the public record, you'll have a better idea around when, what, are you gonna make a decision to close the public hearing? Because this board in the past has actually deliberated and never closed the public hearing. I mean, they've just had the ability to do so. They've also closed the public input portion of the public hearing. You may want to direct people, and give them, like, this is your last opportunity. We probably will be closing the public input at the next meeting. And based on that, you may be interested in getting some of the public input on the waiver request. I wouldn't be surprised if your waiver submission at least changes in some way, shape, or form. So I think that alone may be worthwhile to keep at least one more meeting beyond this as a public meeting, and to get any recommendations from your local boards and commissions.
That was gonna be my next question with regard to the public meeting and how it affects the waiver request, because I personally would like to keep a public meeting open, if for no other reason than to give other committees who potentially could be affected by a waiver request an opportunity to come to the next meeting, have their information ahead of time so they can review it, on the areas that they're affected by directly, and then make a presentation to us as to why we should or shouldn't consider a waiver.
Yep, so this board, when it's deliberated in the past, sometimes has actually started with the waiver requests and been able to kind of deliberate on those particular requests. And then, if there's one of concern, that kind of gets discussed with the developer, to see if it's really an essential waiver request, or is there any ways that some plan designs might be able to be done so that it's not needed anymore. I think that if you get a revised waiver list at this stage, you're gonna have to give each of the boards and commissions an opportunity to hold a meeting where this goes on to their agenda, so that they can discuss it, if that's what they plan on doing. They did get, a number of town boards, commissioners, officials' letters, that I know likely will be updated before this closes out, so, those are all, decisions about process that you can take, but, in my mind, as I'm thinking this through, I think it might make sense to see what gets submitted on the waiver request and potentially take that as sort of your starting point for your deliberations, and then from there, we'll also talk about, what are conditions gonna look like, is there some kind of draft language that we can put together. I've obviously been keeping notice, I'm sure Chris has, about various conditions that we've been discussing along the way. And then you guys can decide, what do you want that to look like. And then at some point in time, you really get into more regular meetings that are happening not monthly, but possibly even weekly, just to really hammer out the details of the language. And that kind of brings you to a close, and you get to the point where it's filed.
Yeah, just, if I may, Mr. Chairman, two things. One, I think generally, this development team volunteers, does its best to kind of encapsulate all the proposed conditions that we've discussed and kind of submit that as a proposed decision, and the board can take it, crumple it up, throw it in the trash if it wants to, or can, turn it over to town council, and town council can, help tailor that to see whether or not there's anything missing, anything additional that the board might want to include. So we'll probably volunteer that as part of the process. Another point that's highly technical, and it's just worth revisiting, because I know we discussed it very early on in the process, and it was kind of touched upon at the last hearing when we had to continue, is who are the voting members, and what does that deliberation look like? I know, at the outset, Mr. Gale had pointed out that he was a resident in one of Stonebridge's communities and had recused himself, and I think as we go into the deliberative phase, that recusal might take a more formal appearance, at least, in terms of, whether it's public comment and input at that point, or versus formal board deliberation as a board member. I think, the comments of Mr. Gale today have been infinitely helpful in helping to shape the project and point out areas of concern. So it's been great to, have his participation. But just as we move into a formal deliberative phase, just to make sure we're not tripping on anything technical in that sense. It just as far as how any further input might look. So just to raise that again as an entirely technical point, just to keep everything, all appearances
Okay.
in the right order.
Are we having any more working sessions?
That was what my next thing to ask, yeah.
So we had, at the time, thought that the working session didn't make sense. Not sure if it really continues to make sense at this stage.
Only thing-
Typically, working sessions are designed to try to establish a layout,
Right.
but then when you get into the
Way past that.
deliberation phase, you're gonna want the input of all the voting members of the board. And even non-voting members can still participate, although I hear your point on the recusal piece of this, so, I'll certainly have a conversation, as well with the chairman about that, so.
The only thing like I thought we had, that we could still discuss would be, like we discussed about the dumpster thing, we could do that amongst each other in the
Yeah.
next meetings and stuff like that.
The next
locations.
iteration of the plan should be the
Yeah.
final one,
We'll
and
be able to go
we'll
through
show
all
that.
Yeah, 'cause realistically, we've hashed most of it all out.
Chairman, I thought in the past meetings, we did have some working sessions when we were reviewing the waiver list,
Right.
so. that
Yeah,
was-
I need to see what's
We don't
submitted
know.
before,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm
before
saying
we know,
that's
but
passed.
that might be,
Yeah,
what, depending on what you submit, it might make sense at our next public hearing, that we set up an interim working session just to go through that and make sure that we've covered any large areas of concern, and then bring that back to the board for the public hearing.
Frankly,
I-
just cause
that's a good point.
I haven't, and it's, you brought it up, and I haven't looked at it since before this iteration, but how do you approach the waiver list as far as, format? I mean, do you go through each individual bylaw, identify a rationale, and then identify waived, modified, or enforced? Is that,
So they only identify what's being waived or modified. So they would
Okay.
assume that anything you aren't bringing up is going to be enforced.
so then that's one of the areas that, this development team has been cautious in drafting its permits in that, or in negotiating its permits in that we generally, and understanding that waivers are sacred, this is the local bylaw and we wanna make sure that we've addressed everything. There is always the situation where you might show something on the plan that may implicate a bylaw provision that no one had in mind when the permit was drafted. So generally, what we look for is something that says, the board grants the following waivers, to the extent there's any waiver that wasn't contemplated, and the plan requires it, the plan shall control. Because ultimately, we put so much time and effort into negotiating the plan and making sure that the plan works from a development perspective, to have it run up against a bylaw that might have been drafted on some issue that doesn't necessarily affect the concern that the board had during this hearing, rather than have to have a whole hearing about the waiver in the future, to have some language that just protects both parties, to say, look, the plan is the condition, so
For
we can see
example-
how that,
For example, there is no bylaw that permits, condominium, townhouses in the town. So how do you address that? How do you, what waiver do you are you violating by doing that?
I would say take a look at the zoning bylaw on that one, and you may come up with something, but to respond to your comment, and I know, Chris, that you've certainly been here before with this board, those types of general language pieces have certainly been presented to this board in the past. I don't know how this particular group of board members will vote on that, but typically this board has not been, interested in having that type of language ultimately in a decision. You can certainly take a look at a few of the other decisions that have been issued and see how they do that. What they have done is they've asked their town engineer, their peer reviewing engineer, to take a look at the waiver request to see if there's anything that he notices in the plan. They understand the concept behind it, so they're not, they're not opposed to the idea of the concept, but they'd rather have a public discussion if there needs to be a particular provision or bylaw that exists now that wasn't discussed already, that needs to be waived down the road. And I don't think they're opposed to doing that, they're willing to do that, but then at least there's just some opportunity for that to be brought into some sort of, public meeting. And so that's generally been the approach that this board has taken. This board may take a different approach with this particular case, but my my hope is, I mean, take a look at what exists, they're usually attached as an exhibit, to each of the decisions, so you can kind of see how it's laid out. They will identify what's been waived in its entirety, or put in the revised language, if there's revised language, to any waivers, and they'll look at various bylaws within the town. And I think there might be something you can do with a zoning bylaw around condominiums, but.
Alright, before we go on to discussing the next date, Nancy, you have one more point you wanted to make?
Yeah, just a question. When the new plans come out and everybody that needs to get them gets them, is there any objection if the planning, I'll pick three, stormwater planning and conservation held a joint meeting to review those plans and also to go over a list of waivers? Now, each board would have to still make their own separate recommendation, but my thought is, we just approved a solar farm, and the proponent said we had to meet with this board and this board, and we keep making the same presentations, and we said we would love to have a group meeting with the boards that need to hear it, so the proponent just has to make one presentation, and we ask all the questions, and we hear the answers all together. The boards then have to separately make decisions and make recommendations, but does anybody know if that would be a taboo in this whole process?
So all I can say is that, the zoning board of appeals would encourage the input of any other board or commission as to any waiver requests over bylaws or regulations that they would otherwise enforce. However, those boards don't have the ability to make the final decision. So all they're doing is providing recommendations about the plan, so maybe conditions that might exist in the areas that they look at, or waiver recommendations. They're not actually making final decisions. It's a public meeting, any joint meeting you create or any individual meetings that you have would be public meetings, and it's up to this developer whether they want to attend, to send a representative or not to that. And they need to be posted, et cetera, but.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's, as long as there's that understanding that ultimately the decision is made by the, zoning board of appeals, which I hear you saying, so I know you have that understanding. And that what you're doing is you're putting together a letter of recommendations or comments to the zoning board of appeals for submission into their record. That's allowed.
Well, each individual board would still have to do that. My thought is, if the three boards I mentioned, commissions, got together and said, well, we got questions on this, and we asked the developer to send somebody or appear, we could get all of our information and not have them go before each board individually. We could all hear the same discussion, get the same information, then the separate boards could write their own letters to the ZBA and say, this is what we think.
So Nancy, what I think if I hear you right, what you're asking is whether or not other boards in town can collectively have a conversation with the developer around the waiver issue, not necessarily as directly as part of the ZBA board. In other words, does it have to be in this setting, or are you asking potentially, could you have another meeting with the developer, with the other boards who simply have questions around the waiver issues, and then get back to us with your
Well, quite frankly, if the ZBA wants to sit in and we all hear the same stuff, that would also save
I
time.
wouldn't, so that I'd be hesitant to
But that's
have.
what I was
Yeah,
concerned
but what I would say
That's
is,
why I'm asking.
here's the other
Yes.
piece, from the zoning board's perspective, if the developer chooses not to attend, which that's up to them, it's a public meeting. I would hope that these boards and commissions would still go ahead and provide any comments, because all that this zoning board is going to be tasked with the obligation of making a decision.
Correct.
With a certain amount of timeline, established, and while I think that, sitting here tonight, everyone understands there needs to be an extension at some point in time, they may not be as agreeable to giving an extension, so, keeping all that in mind, if you don't end up having the developer show up and you still have open questions, I would hope that any input you wanna give is still provided to the board, so they can take that into consideration when they're making their final decisions, rather than just simply refusing to give anything until a developer shows up, because it isn't intended to be having the developer go to each of these boards to make a presentation. I mean, that's not their obligation under 40B,
Correct.
and, but, if they wanna come in, if they wanna do something with that, they can. If instead you have a representative of your board who just has questions, you wanna reach out to the developer to get answered, that could be a way that you could approach it.
I was thinking of two different things. First of all, the question was, would anyone object to, let's say, those three boards, commissions getting together and looking at the new plans and see if they have questions in common that could be submitted either to the developer in person or sent to the developer and say, can you just clear this up for us? So that would be one. As far as the waivers go, whether or not this group meeting, planning, stormwater, conservation, would even wanna talk about waivers in a group meeting, that's a whole nother issue. My main concern was open public meeting, 3 commissions, looking at whatever issues there are, to get information as a group, and whether the developer sends somebody, or we just send questions to them to get the information. I didn't wanna violate any kind of rules by having a group meeting, obviously open to the public, the whole bit, yeah, we posted and all that.
The only other caveat I'll make is with regards to the Conservation Commission, because, the Conservation Commission, they will need to file with the Conservation Commission anyways as part of their permitting process.
Right.
Under the state laws. So, you know, the Conservation Commission may not be, may choose to still come and do a joint meeting with you, that's their decision, but they're gonna be looking really at anything that involves the local bylaw. And that would be probably what this board would be. I mean, this board has no ability to waive any of the state rules or have any, you know, they have to comply with that. And that's going to be presented before the Conservation Commission, and they're gonna have that fully vetted,
Right.
I'm sure, after, ultimate decision is issued here.
Okay.
So I would just, the Conservation Commission is just its own unique entity in this process, because they're going to end up having this developer before them.
Okay,
Down the road.
and these other 2 commissions or boards may say, now, we don't wanna do that, which is fine. It came up during the discussion with the solar farm, because they had to make, I don't know how many presentations to how many boards. We were the last one that came to, and had we all been together initially, probably 1 presentation would have sufficed for that solar farm, except for limited details, so that was my question here. The only other question I have is, I've heard, you mentioned that the developer should be looking at the list of waivers. With this list of waivers, can more be added, can some be deleted, may both happen, at what point is there a cutoff point? All I can think of is in collective bargaining, these are the ground rules, you can't do any more changes. So is there a point in this whole process that the list of waivers that's going to be presented is finalized and no new ones can be requested?
So again, that gets to the idea of at what point in time do you close the public hearing?
Okay,
Once the public hearing is closed, then nothing else can be submitted into the record,
okay,
from anybody, including the developer. So then you've got your list of waivers, and it is what it is, and the board's gonna make a decision based on that. And then if there needs to be a change in the future, there are rules under 40B regulations about how you go about making that type of a change request. That would include a change to any waivers that might not have been added to a list that they're now requesting, unless this board were to agree to a condition like Attorney Augustino was suggesting, that kind of gave a little bit more flexible language to allow for waivers to already be deemed to be approved if the plan was referring to that. And that was where my comment went, to say this board hasn't historically done that. I don't know exactly what the position I'm told the members is on that right now, but I would think that the way this board has handled it before is to have their peer review engineer take a look at the waiver request and consider that in light of the plans and his familiarity with all the various town bylaws, and regulations, and then just provide input that way. So, I anticipate there will come a time where the waiver list will be what is submitted, what's been submitted, and we won't be looking at additional ones.
okay, all right. And just from the developer standpoint, if we had this group meeting of these 2 commissions and we had questions, are you amenable to us either, if you're not present, but at least emailing them to you and saying, can you clarify this for us? Us meaning planning,
Of course. Well,
conservation,
I would just,
whatever.
You asked the question earlier whether that was taboo
Yeah,
in the 40B
so I just wanna
context.
know what the feelings are, cause I don't
Yeah,
wanna ask
no,
for a joint
totally
meeting.
understood, and the process, is unique in land use permitting in Massachusetts, and you bring the, example of that solar farm. This process is intended to eliminate that very result, where the developer has to go to several different boards and several
Yeah.
different meetings. And the idea in the process is that the planning board, the Board of Health, even the Concom at this stage, the idea is for them to have been actively engaged at all of these meetings. And, you know, we submit the plans, and the plans are supposed to get disseminated on a regular basis. And if those boards were to have wanted to met together as a group on the side, or even individually, and then provided comments, that should be happening during the process.
Have they?
So they have provided comments,
Oh,
yes,
okay,
yeah, but
alright.
again, they provided comments to the original plan.
Okay,
You make a good point that, you know, this new iteration has been floating around since November, or at least the detailed version of it.
right.
The schematic version of it even before November. So hopefully, those boards are aware of that plan, and, you know, frankly, I think we're at the speak now or forever hold your peace moment,
Okay.
where, you know, if they have any comments, they should, at their next meeting before, 2 weeks prior to the following meeting, and then depending on where we go as far as public comment or board input from there, now's really the time to get those comments out.
Okay. As I said, I'm not looking to create meetings.
No, understood.
But I know what this gentleman said, and if you had input from those other boards, obviously, we're not looking to change anything around. We came into this late, we, the Stormwater Committee, but going forward, it's just a thought that, you know, might be worth considering in the future, let me put it that way.
So we're looking to set the next, hearing date, so for Peter, Marguerite, for potential, meeting dates, would you wanna keep Tuesdays, does that work best for you guys, or in general? Tuesdays still? So we are at the 14th of January, we've got maybe February 18th would be, or February 11th, it would be, if we're doing exactly a month, it would fall in between there on the 14th, which is a Friday.
Yeah, I'm out of town on the 18th, so I won't be able to.
On the 18th, okay, so 11th would work.
I'm open on the 11th.
11th,
I'm actually unavailable on the 11th.
okay. I just think the fourth wouldn't be a month, but it would be 4 weeks.
You're gonna get all these plans to Peter Williams 2 weeks prior to it.
Right,
as
so
you
we-
stated,
And if we
too.
wanna
By
get-
the 21st.
So it's,
Yeah.
are we thinking more the 25th then of February? That would be the last Tuesday in the month.
Could we do I mean, I know we've tried to stick with Tuesdays, but is
So,
there
yep.
any chance, like, the 12th would work, that Wednesday?
So then we're just, Rod is possibly going into,
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if that's enough time if we're gonna be
Yeah.
asking other
It's-
committees
it's-
to look at.
well, what,
Well, I don't envision you're gonna get the input from other committees for the next
Yeah.
meeting. I think if you're lucky, you'll be getting a waiver list that you'll be able to send out to other committees. So in all likelihood, I would envision, unless we push this into March, a ways into March, you're not gonna really have the opportunity, because you'd have to have a deadline of somewhere around this time anyways.
I'm just gonna go back then, if I could, Mr. Chairman, to Marguerite, to what we were discussing a few minutes ago, when we're looking at a date now.
Mhm.
Is to look at the date, and you said something needs to be in writing, do we need to agree with the developer now to continue the hearing?
we're good, yeah,
Yep,
but
that's something that would need to take
Yep.
place before it closes.
But yeah, we're just talking
Before the
about,
meeting closes.
the next meetings first.
Okay.
So Wednesdays, that's kinda tough for this room, right? Do you know who meets,
I don't.
so
Thursday,
was it,
Any day that
Thursday.
week other than the Tuesday.
any day, I'm sorry, the 11th we're talking about, that week?
Yeah, any day other than the 11th.
I think most boards are meeting next door. Board of Health meets over there, Conservation meets over there. So I would assume this room is open, and if you set the date a month ahead of time, I can get it posted and on the calendar so that you guys get the room.
Okay, so that'd be February 12th.
If you decided on that
Either the
Wednesday.
Monday, if Monday's better, Monday or Wednesday, sorry.
Okay, I know, for me, it'd be Wednesday, would be better. So I just have the 12th work for you,
I
or,
believe so.
yeah, Marguerite,
That's fine right now, I prefer it be Wednesday, not Thursday,
okay,
if we were going that
12th?
far.
Yep.
At 7.
alright, yes, so the next meeting would be, February 12th, 7 o'clock in the lower, room we are in right now.
At 7?
Yeah, at 7, yep,
And we'll have a package in by the 29th.
okay. Okay, and then Roz, if we have the extension form for them to sign?
I do have one, Marguerite, but it's not a comprehensive permit, it's just
I think just a letter, Chris, to
I can
extend the
submit a
date.
letter, I'll
If you
submit.
can even handwrite it in tonight.
I mean, we can state on the record that the applicant extends, I mean, what I'd like to do is set a date certain, since I think
Right,
we're
I
probably
figured.
already,
Yeah, I
so
figured
let's
that.
talk about that maybe, and again, we're looking at the deadline for the board to close the public hearing, but again, that's a technical,
Right.
so just looking at the calendar, if we meet on the 12th,
Mhm.
you know, we could, for now, we could formally extend to the 14th of February and then, you know, just have a discussion on the 12th.
We have a form here, we could probably just edit and everybody initial and sign it.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to the board, I mean, I think a nice letter from me, I enjoy writing letters, right?
No, give us your form.
I think just Fisher signs that, so I can edit it in the morning, and if you're in town,
Yeah.
if that's okay with Marguerite.
Yeah, I don't know the case number, that was on the.
0319?
Yes, it is, yes.
Either you or I stop by.
It will be comprehensive permit.
Just so the board knows, we have one unrelated thing to discuss after this hearing, so just make sure we stick around. We have one more thing on the agenda.
You wondering the applicant, I was wondering the same
Yeah.
thing. Is it
Who's the
Strawberry
petitioner?
Fields?
Do you have, I just don't have the notice of public.
Strawberry Fields
Mhm.
is the petitioner, LLC, just the.
The Strawberry Fields Estates LLC is the
Estates,
name of
okay.
the entity.
Okay, yeah.
And that doesn't have a defined date on it, does it?
Well, that's what we're gonna, that's
Yep.
next.
I just wanna be careful, I just want us to be really careful about that.
Yeah, so that's so it would have a firm date here, Chris, for this. So I guess that would be the question, so in all likelihood, I could envision a public hearing at least going into March.
The public hearing or public input? The public hearing.
Which would be where public input could still be given. I think my recommendation, just in case, I don't know how quickly boards can turn around their meetings, especially with February vacation schedules, school vacation then. I guess my recommendation would be you bring it out to like the middle of April, and then we won't have to keep extending.
Just for the absolute
But
longest.
like I said, I envision we'll be talking and deliberating prior to that, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think my initial reaction was, since we're just trying to clean this up for our purposes, and we're going to be having this discussion at the next hearing.
Yeah.
Forget about doing it right after the next hearing, but, you know, assuming one hearing in March, in the middle of March, could we just call it March 20th for now?
We can, I wouldn't be surprised if there needs to be a conversation about the further extension.
That's fine, yeah, and as I think we've conveyed tonight, you know, generally that's a non-issue.
Okay, so then Ron, do you wanna go ahead, you can go ahead and date that, for the extension would be until, Friday, March
Something goes
20th.
terrible
With the question mark.
March 20th?
Okay.
And I'll edit this and then, Fisher can sign
No,
it in
they
the
can
morning.
sign tonight, I think it's just handwritten, and then if you need to have them re-sign, you can.
I used to, just before he signs it, I have him look it over just to make sure.
I didn't do much other than to make it apply to comprehensive permit.
Yeah,
Wanna
it's.
take a look at it?
Looks like
No
Very
legalese?
official, huh?
You don't have to worry about that.
I didn't realize you guys were anywhere near this far into the process, I would've had that with me, sorry.
No.
Honestly, I think I was calculating from August, when I looked at it, I had a February date, early February date, so.
Okay, so then I would need a vote to extend the public hearing to, that would be the February 12th.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, we open this up for a meeting on February 12th at 7 PM, lower level town hall,
To continue the public,
to continue public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, so there's nothing else needed to be discussed for Strawberry Fields, so you guys are all set. We just have one more thing on our agenda, so.
Thank you.
That doesn't involve me, all right?
No, it's not, it doesn't involve, you.
You have to
You
do
can-
something with that.
Okay, just one.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do you have public input on your agenda?
Yeah.
All right, 'cause I just got let down to the town's gate, but I see a lot of towns
Gentlemen, if you don't mind, can we just first in the hallway? Thank you. Guys, it's over meeting, get a little money first in the hallway, please.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
And I know.
Alright, so the other thing on our agenda, we have a potential new, office manager. He is here tonight. Mallory just, in order to make this official, we will need to vote, to make a recommendation to the BOS, to hire him. He's Jonathan Gray. Roz, our interim, I guess, interim office administrator is here right now. And she sat in on the interview, so first if you just wanna give us, the feedback from that and how you felt that went, 'cause Mallory was, in the interview, as well, but,
Yeah.
Roz is here tonight, so she can tell us her
Yeah.
thoughts.
Zach wasn't available, so Mallory asked me if I wouldn't mind stepping out and sitting in on the interviews. Jonathan has a wonderful resume. I sent it out to all of you. I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at it yet. I think he's a great fit. We had, I apologize for that. There were a couple of questions on a few things. I'm sure you guys have some questions.
Yep.
So, that got loud.
I know, yeah. I told him to go in the hallway, it was still loud, so.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, the only question that I had a little bit of concern about was you have a full-time position now, and this is only a part-time position that basically, I just wanna make sure that you're comfortable
Yeah.
with that. So, that was my only concern.
That was one of mine, yeah, one of mine too. Sure. Not an objection, obviously, just more of a question.
Just to make sure, because we did have with the Board of Health, when he came in, he, was under a misassumption, so, and then it was already hired, and it was like, oh, I didn't realize, I thought.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
I'll
just
clear
wanna
that
make
up.
sure.
Yeah, I have no assumption that it's gonna become a full-time job. I'm perfectly fine with it being a part-time job, 20 hours a week. So from that perspective, I'm fully, I'm actually coming from a position where I don't have benefits currently in my role, so this is actually sort of an upgrade
I see,
in
okay.
that way, and, it's sort of, it more, a higher sort of rate as well. And so I'm very comfortable with part-time, and from a perspective of my own sort of household income, it's not an issue as well.
Okay.
And sort of have plans to do things on the side as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my, and then what in detail, I guess, is your current position and what do you do? Is it office administration work like this would be, or is it something different?
Yeah, so I'm the outreach coordinator at CMAP, Southeastern Massachusetts Agricultural Partnership. It is a organization, a nonprofit organization that represents the agricultural interests of Bristol, Plymouth, and Norfolk counties, which is about a 75-town area, and we have 2.5 staff. So it is a job where I'm wearing many hats. I'm responding to inquiries from the public, that all the sort of general questions about sort of programs that we have are coming to me, and I'm sort of the friendly face that's talking with people over the phone about, if they have a problem with registering for one of our events, or a question about specific state programs, and how, there's just a very wide range of questions that people can ask related to sort of Southeastern Massachusetts agriculture, and so I try to be, able to answer as many questions as I can, and sort of, it's, again, multiple hats type of role, so I'm very flexible.
Right, and the reason why I asked, because I know it seems like it'd be, mostly clerical, but in my opinion, I think the primary job is customer service.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to make, I'm sure
Absolutely.
Mallory did, consider that when making her decision on it, so I just wanted to see how you felt about that, it is, I'm not saying it is customer service in a sense, so that's, but it seems that you clearly have a knowledge of that, already, so.
Yeah, and I'll say, we form a lot of partnerships with different organizations. I've met personally with different constituents in towns that wanna do someone at Wheaton College wanted to renovate a greenhouse, and I was able to sort of meet with them and talk things through. I've met with state legislators, talked over specific bills or funding for the budget, so I'm really comfortable with talking to anyone, including the zoning board of appeals.
Excellent. I hope so on that one, yeah.
So yeah, I pride myself on being able to chat with anyone about anything, so I have no problem with that.
Excellent, alright, anyone else on the board with any quick questions for him?
Sure. So you're gonna be working with the building department, you're gonna work with the Board of Health, different offices throughout the building. You have no problem working and taking orders from other folks?
No problem whatsoever.
Like, a lot of people here are willing to help, I'm sure. Coming into a new program, it's nice to listen to somebody, but we just wanna make sure the process goes real smoothly. So it's 20 hours a week, you do understand that, like, when we do meet at night, it's a 20-hour week, it's a comp week, you're only getting 20 hours, so you might have to say, hey, I worked 2 hours on the zoning meeting at night, gotta change that during the day, so the hours of the office would change.
Yeah.
So you do understand, I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure.
Absolutely, so in my role currently, we've got board of directors meetings, committee meetings that regularly go, sometimes until 10 PM or later, and in addition, I serve in multiple
Yeah, I just don't want you to be
town
misled,
committees.
that's
Yeah.
all, so, because some of these 40Bs, as you can see, you take some time, and this is an early one,
Yeah.
we've left at 1 o'clock in the morning, me and him on some of these.
Yeah.
To the point
I
where
don't
we
doubt
actually had to say, well, Joe did too, this meeting ends, and you did, at this time, because it was just constantly going, pretty much bobbing your head at the table, because you're tired.
Sure.
So, I just, like I said, I'm welcome aboard, I think it'd be a good fit, I just wanted to make sure you understood about the 20 hours, so.
Peter, Karen, anything you wanna add?
No, I think you're gonna be a great fit,
Yep.
and as long as you wanna do it, I think you'd be a good addition to the board.
Excellent.
Jonathan, you don't know me yet, my name is Jonathan Gale. You met my wife before, Kim Gale, a little bit with the
Yes.
Trails Committee. She thinks you're wonderful, just so you know. And
Good to hear.
I know the stuff I see, you post and other things, you're into a lot of really neat things that I think are pretty awesome. I just wanted to know, going back to the hours a little bit, for the 20 hours, the standard time when we're not meeting, the weeks we're not meeting and so forth is roughly what, 8 to 1? How do you plan to juggle that with your other position, because he has full-time, and
So I'm actually stepping down from my other position,
Okay.
and so this will be my number one priority.
okay.
Right, it would be in addition to the job he has now, it would be in lieu of.
In lieu of, okay, all right. And, I don't know, I forget what the salary was that they offered you, I'm just asking because we have to approve your paychecks.
I believe it was 24.41 an hour, or
I believe that's what the job posting said, right? It
believe
sounds
so.
like it's what it was, right?
And depending the hours, it's normally 5 hours a day. But if 8 to 1, if it's easier for 9 to 2 and the board's okay with that, most of the time I found people come in the afternoon. I don't know why, but it seems like, from 2 to 3:30 tends to be more when they come in.
Okay.
And if you're not here, it's fine, they'll take their information and when you come in the morning. But I think if the board if you wanted to change the 8 to 1, you would have that ability.
Yeah, I think
to
there'd
do
be
that.
probably be more of a discussion between him and I as to, and then Mallory too, as to what she feels. I mean, it's not set in stone that it has to be what Nicole worked or what you
Yeah,
worked.
no.
You know what I mean? It's
No,
gonna be.
I'm just throwing that out.
No, so
Sure.
it'd be up to
No.
us, I guess, to have a discussion as to what, because like I said, I wasn't really aware that the business tends to come more in the afternoon. I'm not there, obviously, the full day, so, that's something that we can discuss going forward as to what works.
absolutely, yeah, I'm flexible, whatever works for the board.
Alright, Michelle, do you have anything?
No, I read his resume and I was impressed with it, and I actually spoke with him about the nature trails through emails before even knowing who he was. And, I mean, I thought you knew exactly what you were talking about, and I was impressed anyway, so.
Okay, alright. So, can I please have a motion that we write a letter to the selectmen, saying that we approve of the hiring of Jonathan Gray to the office administrator position, office manager.
I'll make a motion that we ask the chairman, to send a letter to Mallory Aronstein, the town manager, to approve the hire.
And selectmen, sorry.
And the board of selectmen,
Yes,
okay,
yeah,
as
yep,
well.
yep.
To approve the hire of Jonathan Gray as the part-time office manager, for the zoning board.
Excellent, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Alright, so Russ, you could have that for tomorrow morning, and I don't know if Mallory needs me to physically sign it, or just the email's okay. Alright, so yeah, I'm off tomorrow, so I can come in and sign it tomorrow.
Okay, alright, just, call me or text me in the morning, I'll
Okay.
let you know what's up.
Alright,
Excellent,
you're all set, thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
I'll give you a
Oh, I will see you whenever you start, well, I'll talk to Mallory, when your first day will be.
I'll be
and
talking
we'll-
anyway, cause everything is.
We'll go forward with it.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
Did Mallory just come
Thank
with you an official first day?
I discussed the 27th.
27th?
Yep.
And is there any more public input? I understand that, Nancy has a quick announcement to make.
Public input
Yep.
for those of you who live in the town of Dayton. We had a meeting with, John Hershey, the veterans agent. And the first thing we need to determine is what Dayton wants for a Memorial Day celebration this year. We will be the town of Dayton. We are no longer having a joint parade and ceremony with the town of Rehoboth. Both decided we're back to the way we were. The questions that we need answered. Do the residents of Dayton wanna have the traditional parade, and we're talking about staging at the Elm Street New Police Station area and ending up at the Veterans Park with the ceremony? Or do they wanna forget the parade and just have a ceremony at the Veterans Park? So we're asking people to just respond to that, by the 14th of February, and you can do it, as a matter of fact, you can let Raj know, because the veterans agent is right in the same building, Board of Selectmen, or Dawn directly. But we just need to get a feel for what the people of Dayton want us to do. Cause obviously the parade entails a lot more than just having the ceremony. So that's where we are. We're gonna meet the end of February, and hopefully from the feedback, we can start planning what we wanna do, okay?
Awesome.
So thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.
Is there anything else for public input today? All set? Alright, do I have can I please have a motion, that we adjourn, the meeting tonight?
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting tonight.
You-
They're good.
No,
I was just
no,
gonna say the time,
that's
but
that's
what
good
time
enough,
is
that's
it?
good enough. Go ahead, second, any discussion?
Very much.
All in favor? Aye.
So, yes.
Cable, we're all set?
Check in with Raj to release some material.
Mallory, Marguerite, do you mind, poking your head and letting Cable know we're all set?